Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority.
Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to the first meeting of the committee's investigation into grooming gangs in London. Today we are here to improve our understanding of this important topic. We will hear from investigative journalists who have reported on grooming gangs and have spoken to victims, survivors, charities, solicitors and police representatives. As this is a highly sensitive topic, I would like to remind Assembly members and guests to avoid sharing any personal or contextual information that could identify a victim or survivor of grooming gangs. Please also take care not to disclose anything that could negatively affect any current or future court case, such as identifying alleged offenders or referencing cases that are sub judice. I understand that this discussion may be a difficult one for some, and I encourage anybody who needs support to reach out to available resources. Charities and organisations such as London Survivors Gateway, Victim Support and NSPCC Helpline are ready to help. To our panel, thank you for being with us today. Before I start, I would like to say some of our questions are intentionally quite open. This is not because the committee is unfamiliar with your work. Rather, we want to give you the opportunity to set out your findings in your own words and raise issues that you believe are important. We are conscious that your investigations have covered a wide range of cases and experiences, and we do not want to overly prescriptive line of questioning to prevent important evidence from emerging. Please feel free to expand beyond the specific wording of a question where you think it would assist the committee. Thank you again for being here today, and I hope we can approach this matter with diligence and respect. Now we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I ask our clerk, Sal Faisal, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies for absence have been received.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out in item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the completed, closed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent and received? Thank you. Can we note the recent action taken by me as the chairman of the committee under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members to agree committee's report, oversight of the Met Police culture, is Mopac driving the necessary changes? Thank you. Can we note the response received from the Director of Security, Policing and Enforcement at Transport for London to the committee's report, Hate Crime and Violence Against Women and Girls on London's Public Transport? Thank you. We now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Seema Kotecha, who's a senior UK correspondent with the BBC, Zach Garner-Purkis, investigations editor at The Express, Rachel Burford, political reporter at The Standard, and Charlie Peters, reporter and presenter of GB News. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for coming. Colleagues, Seema, unfortunately, has got a story she's got to follow and will now be leaving around 11:10, 11:15. So if there's anything burning after the first questions, we'll put them to you, Seema. Thank you. Okay, I'm starting off the questions, and this is going to come to all of you. When did the child sexual abuse and exploitation by grooming gangs in London that you have reported on take place? So I'll start with Seema.
Well, I've been looking into this issue for a while now, I would say for a couple of years, but my investigation that went out in January was a collection of lots of interviews that I've been carrying out over several months, including with survivors of grooming, police officers, charities, campaigners, people who've worked with victims for very long time. And what I found out was very apparent that it is taking place in London, that girls as young as 13, according to police officers, are being groomed by gangs in the capital. And their racial makeup is diverse, according to those I've spoken to. I've spoken to girls, women now, who say that they were groomed by largely South Asian men. Actually, the woman that centres in my piece says it happened just a few years ago. And she says that she was groomed by a group of South Asian men. They passed her around for sex. She was sleeping with 10 to 15 men per night over a several-month period. But it's really important to say that other people I've spoken to, other victims, have said that they were groomed by men of various nationalities, whether they were white British, whether they were Albanian, whether they were Turkish. So the evidence that I have gathered shows me that this is a diverse picture in terms of the ethnic makeup of perpetrators, but it's also happening like it's been happening in places like Rotherham. And that model, according to my evidence, does exist in the capital.
Okay, thank you. Zach?
I think it's important to put it in the context of like what's going on right now.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's what Seema says is so crucial because it is happening right now. All of you have vulnerable children in the wards that you're responsible for who will be being affected by this. To pick up, so we went through and we looked through the public record, so media reports, serious case reviews and council reports, and we picked up on stuff that went right across London. To pick one example that went right back to the earliest one that we found, it was, I believe, Assembly Member Hamdash, you're for Islington, right? I'm from Islington. I was born in Islington. I grew up in Islington. In 2002, there was an article in The Guardian that described how and the term is pretty repulsive, a child prostitution ring was so active that Bernardo's workers were overwhelmed. Their services were overwhelmed. They couldn't get a handle on what was going on there. What happened? Nothing. 10 years later, in 2012, a young woman who was being abused by a gang in Finsbury Park went and lay down on some railway lines and took her own life. And it came out in the serious case review that there had been serious failings when she tried to tell people what was going on. Letters that were written that detailed the abuse were lost by police officers. And I think this is the issue, right, which is because there has been a denial from the very top, from the Mayor of London, from the head of the Met Police, from the councils themselves, what we've ended up in a situation which is these gangs don't go away. They keep doing what they're doing. If they're not brought to justice, if the councils don't even acknowledge their existence, it continues and it persists.
Okay, thank you. Rachel?
Thanks. So similar to Zach, I did a similar thing. I went through serious case reviews, child safeguarding practice reviews, council reports, fire safety reports, and my work went back about 2018. But when I was talking to charity workers, social service workers, lawyers, they said that this has been going on for decades. Some of the cases have been reported, things like the Lambeth, the children's homes in Lambeth that go back to the 70s. There is a similar pattern, though, in a system, and the Met Police have never been able to get a grip on it. And if anything, it has got worse. And it's got more broad in terms of the victim profiles and the perpetrator profiles. When I was talking to some of the charity workers, they were basically saying they are now sort of overwhelmed, essentially, with the number of young people and children that they are having to deal with that are coming forward, and the police are also quite overwhelmed with that. So it has been going on for decades and is still going on and is still prevalent today, is what we found.
Thank you, Rachel. Charlie?
So the question was, when did it start in terms of the work that I've been looking into? So cases that I've tracked in London that I'm aware of start from the mid-2000s in terms of cases that I've been able to report on. And what's been interesting about the work that we've been able to produce at GB News on this is how often the cases in London and the horrible instances of abuse that we've reported on actually involve and are closely interlinked to towns across the country. And referring to the exploitation model that Seema was talking about, that's formed the bulk of my investigative work on this scandal, and that revolves around interlinked criminal gangs across the country who are connected by joint criminality, particularly in the drugs trade, particularly around heroin, but also cannabis and cocaine as well. And also that many of them are interlinked in terms of family relations as well. These are clannish, closely aligned family structures who commit criminal actions and have a high degree of trust between them. That has facilitated the movement of both victims and perpetrators across the country with relative ease and an extremely high degree of trust that you wouldn't necessarily appreciate or understand if you're not within those groups or haven't encountered them before. Trust so strong that you'd happily leave cousins to drive children, girls as young as 13, as we've already heard, from Bradford and Rotherham down to London for the purposes of abuse and repeat that trip several times on behalf of somebody else who is paying you to do it. Those are the sort of cases that I've reported on. We've also learned through manuscripts and transcripts from trials that have been released about the movement of victims from lots of towns. And some of these victims have not spoken out publicly about this, but those cases are available. A lot of them a bit of a battle to get those transcripts released. But we know, for example, in the Oxford grooming gang, the Thames Valley Police Operation Bullfinch investigation, one of the major investigations of this issue across the country, we know that of one girl being taken to London Paddington at least 6 times for the purposes of being trafficked beyond for sexual abuse from Oxford. We don't know where she went, who took her. That information hasn't been followed up, as far as I'm aware, by the Met Police. There's not been a successful investigation into that element. But that case is indicative of the ones that I've covered. Criminal gangs linked by clannishness, culture, but also the drugs trade as well, moving victims and abusers all over the country. And one key element that has been central to this work in terms of how it revolves around London is the level of prestige attached to London in terms of the perpetrators who are from there. There are victims in Bradford who will tell you that when abusers came up from London, there was an especial high degree of focus from fellow perpetrators, that those men were deserving of additional attention and afforded a greater degree of access to girls, drugs, and other forms of criminality during the period of their visit. And I think that points to seniority within these clannish networks of the crime families and those gangs in London, and also perhaps the extent to which they've escaped prosecution so far.
Thank you. Now, Rachel's answered this, that you think it's still going on. Can I ask all of you, the rest of you, do you think this is still going on? Is it getting worse? I'll start with Seema again.
100%. I've spoken to so many survivors, I'm sure, like the other journalists at this table, because when you do look at this subject, you can't gather material and evidence without obviously speaking to those at the heart of this issue. And not one survivor has raised doubts about whether this is still happening. 100% over and over again, I'm hearing that from victims who've just become adults in some cases, saying that this is rife, that it's happening across the country, and in some cases that people are feeling a sense of anger that London hasn't been a focal point, because obviously we've got the highest population in this city, and people say it's just common sense, isn't it, when you've got a population this large, that what's happening in other parts of the country is bound to be happening here, and I'm told it's happening in spades, and I believe the survivors I've been speaking to.
Okay, Zach.
Yeah, I think the important question is, why is it still happening, right? And I'll go through it and some of the stuff that we dug up. And one of those was that the Sunday Times ran on its front page that Levi Belfield was linked to a grooming gang in West London, right? That had a report from a council worker that said that the group involved in that, because they had not faced any kind of justice, because they were out there committing their crimes and it was so well known, they felt untouchable. Those are literally the words that were used by that council worker. And the problem that we've had here is we have not acknowledged the problem. Like I say, you get, the head of the Met here, who sat here years back and said it's not something that he sees. So what happened there? Why was he not seeing it? Why did the mayor think that there was no indication and that we had these type of gangs in London? Because all of us were able to find it. And we need a big prosecution. The police need to bring people to justice. And once that happens, the floodgates will open.
Okay. Do you want to add anything, Rachel?
I think it clearly is still going on in London. The workers I spoke to and survivors said exactly that. I think we've all heard it. I think one of the reasons that a lot of the particularly charity workers brought up was the sheer number of children in care in the capital. There's between 9,000 and 10,000, and they are vulnerable. There are very few children's homes in the capital. There are no secure children's homes for very vulnerable children, so they are being shipped out of the city to places as far away as Scotland, which makes them more vulnerable to these abusers who can contact them away from their social workers and away from any kind of family or friend networks they may have in the city. So yeah, it very clearly still is going on. That is what I think we've all heard.
Thank you. Charlie?
Yes, absolutely still going on, but the methods are changing. So 20 years ago, when perhaps people first becoming aware of this grooming method of group-based exploitation, we were becoming accustomed to stories of school children being approached at school gates or in fast food restaurants or in taxis. And that method of approach and that facilitation through what's known by charities and groups that organise on this as the boyfriend model of exploitation, that's still alive, that's still happening. But the method of approach is changing. I think the core criminality is still there, but the methods for attracting are now more about online approaches as well. So we're seeing the rise of Snapchat being used by perpetrators to reach out to children in the first instance. That has been seen in a number of recent trials that I've attended. That's not even something even close to being isolated to London. That's a national issue. But it is very much becoming more prevalent in terms of the first access. Once that has been achieved and a child has been conned and warped in this horrific model of abuse, what happens after? That hasn't changed much. That child is then used for the purposes of essentially being a sexual product who is then pimped out to untold numbers of perpetrators around the country. There are some cases where it's more isolated, access is provided more locally, and also for the movement of drugs and also for the use of those children as part of a drugs deal. We know, of course, all of us that the movement of drugs is hugely prevalent in London, particularly hard narcotics such as heroin and cocaine. And we also know that many of the victims who've spoken about their experiences of being trafficked by grooming gangs to or in London have described that they thought they were being used as part of a drug deal, that they were part of the bargain. At least 2 victims have told me that in terms of being moved from northern former mill or mining towns to London. That was what they thought was happening. And as I said before, the prestige of those London crime families and networks, they were brought along to help smooth over a deal, they believe, or were part of a drugs deal because the groups that they were connected to in London were deemed so important that a child was brought along to be part of that process. And that happened several times with a couple of victims that have spoken to us. So, yes, still very much going on. Methods have changed, but the core criminality remains.
Thank you. We've got loads of questions. So I'm going to move on to Assembly Member Ahmed. Before I do, though, do you find, because certainly I've spoken to many survivors, and you are inundated. It's almost like you're overwhelmed. Do you all find that? And you get to the point you think, oh my God, so many, and they won't get in touch with the police because they don't trust them. They won't, sometimes they've been turned away from medical facilities. And you think, God, I've got to try and help these people, but they're terrified of authorities. And do you get that? Because I was quite overwhelmed because you think, I must help people, But blimey, how do I go on from there? Okay, I'm sure some of this will emerge. Thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. And can I just thank you for being here and actually, addressing what must have been a really difficult issue for you when you were all doing your investigations. I've done enough work on child abuse per se to know how difficult that is. And Zach, I particularly see how emotionally that was affecting you. And always we have to put the victims front and centre of any kind of conversation about this appalling issue. And I'm glad that is what you're doing. What I'd like to ask you is, could you tell us about the scope of your investigation actually in London, the numbers of sources that you drawn and how you verified it? I mean, how did you do your investigations? I know you want to talk about across the country, but obviously we are specifically looking at London. And Charlie, if it's okay, I've got a couple of questions raised based on things that you've said as well that I'd like to come back on, Chair. So, Seema, I suspect I know what you're going to say, but if you'd like to start.
Yeah, of course. What Susan said is absolutely true, that once you speak to one survivor, suddenly you're inundated with stories from others. For me, at the heart of my journalism is building relationships with case studies, as we call them in our business. So survivors, building up that relationship, making sure that they trust you and that you trust them. And that can take a very long time. Let's be honest, it's not something that you build overnight. It's going to meet them, having coffees, having long conversations with them about their experiences. And also getting to a point as a journalist where you actually do believe what they're saying. And you might do that through dates. You might do that through your own investigation by speaking to their lawyers, for example, or speaking to other people that they know, their social worker who might back up their story and tell you this is what they've been through. They may have made a report to the police. So there are various ways of standing up their story. But for me, at the heart of this and at the heart of every investigation I do is that solid relationship. That is a must. Gaining that trust, you believing them and them believing you. For me, for this investigation I did in January, which is the catalyst, if you like, in terms of having more people get in touch and also leading to other reports on grooming. In fact, I'm doing one at the moment for BBC News. But it's about carrying out interviews with dozens of people. So for the report I did in January, I spoke to dozens of people within the sphere of grooming, and that includes police officers off the record, social workers, grooming victims, lawyers, lots of solicitors who also, obviously, as you guys know, help you in speaking to the victims as well, and gathering that as a bundle of evidence, which then helps you to paint that picture. And from my bundle of evidence that seems to be growing on a monthly basis, because this is not a story you just push away once you've done one report, it is a problem that is, as I said, rife across London and something that needs as much attention as possible. And I think us journalists are kind of, responsible in a way of making sure that we do get that out there and that this problem is taken seriously. And we not only owe it to the victims, but we also, I think, owe it to ourselves as journalists to kind of expose what wrongdoing we are exposed to as well.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, so with these stories, it can be incredibly hard you can completely believe what a source is telling you, but then the part of proving it can be really, really difficult. We took a different approach when we were doing our big investigation, which we went to the public record to see, because my colleague Callum Cuddiford had done a FOI to all of the councils about whether they had any grooming gangs investigations. Now, they all came back and said they either couldn't find information on it or they didn't have any, which was very strange, because when we started digging into the council's own documents, we found stuff like Hounslow Council had produced a magazine in the mid-2010s where they had literally described a grooming gang story of a real case study and reported that they'd had more people that had come forward about that. Now, fast forward to when Callum did his FOI, Hounslow Council were the only ones that came back and said, oh, we did actually have a grooming gang investigation. As he probed it, they said, oh, no, actually, that was a resident of Hounslow and it didn't exist there. So what had happened that their own communications had said this, and then that they were going round, jumping through hoops to explain that they didn't have this issue. And this is, I think, one of the key things with London, which is it's been there the whole time. And actually, when you go back through and you look at the old media reports, it's just referred to in a different way. We just didn't have the terms. And the remarkable thing is, actually, a lot of councils, after what happened in Rochdale and what happened in Rotherham, they started looking into it themselves and they produced reports on it. But then all of a sudden, it just went quiet. And then it suddenly became, this doesn't exist here. And so, we've put all of the kind of sources of the stuff that we've looked at, and I would encourage everyone to look at it for themselves. But that is a thing that really needs to be pushed, is we need transparency about what was known by these organisations.
It sounds as if you're talking about joining up the dots, and is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Rachel.
Yeah, so similarly to Zach, we looked at lots of reports from all of London councils. And what...
Rachel, I'm really sorry. Would you mind bringing your mic a little bit closer? Thank you.
There we go. We looked at reports from all of the London councils to see what they had done. What we found was there was a lot of individual reports which were clearly showed that this child had been a victim of a grooming gang, and it basically said that. But there was never any sort of joining up with other boroughs. They never looked at whether these perpetrators could have been working across boroughs. They never looked at whether victims knew each other. So it was all very sort of siloed and just individual, and it was just about the one victim rather than there may have been lots more. And that was very common across everything we looked at. We also put in FOIs to the Met as well, because I think, as Zach said, after the sort of reporting around Rotherham, there was a sudden sort of, I wonder if this is going on here kind of thing in many other cities, including London. And the Met did launch something called Operation Granby, based around Stratford in 2017. And although that uncovered over a dozen victims, and there were people were arrested, nothing ever came of it. It just sort of fizzled out. And that's what we found, is there was this sort of sudden burst of publicity around grooming gangs at the time of Rotherham and Rochdale. And the Met sort of yes, we're going to get on this, we're going to do it. And councils similarly did the similar thing. And then it just sort of fizzled out. And when it comes to child exploitation in the capital, the focus still seems to be very much on county lines and drug dealing. And I mean, that is because it is more visible perhaps to the public, because there is sort of violence on the streets associated with that. But the child sexual exploitation is very closely linked to the county lines gangs as well, and it is the part that is being ignored.
So are you suggesting that with the county lines gangs, that is where a lot of the child... I mean, we know that does happen to an extent. That's what we've been told by senior Met officers. We've been told that the issue around child exploitation in London is things like county lines. And that's on the record. We've seen that. I can't believe that there wouldn't be sexual exploitation of those children in that situation. So are you talking about there being something separate to those county line gangs, or are you saying that this is quite prevalent within those county line gangs? Is there a differentiation between the two?
No, I think it's both. I think it is prevalent within the county lines drug gangs who use children to distribute drugs across the country, and also use them for sex as well. But there are separate issues as well around groups of men targeting children, predominantly in care.
Thank you. And Charlie, you said something earlier about basically networks, and children from other parts of the country and gangs from other parts of the country connecting with London. Can you just explain that? Are you suggesting then that there is a wider national network that London might be part of? Or, I mean, if you could just go into that. And also, in terms of, my original question, what is your, what evidence and how did you verify it in terms of your investigation in London?
I'll start with the second question. I mean, what's been really lucky for me, frankly, is how many of the very brave victims and survivors that we've worked with are still in touch with their social workers from when they were children, and how easy it has been for us to get in touch with them as well, and how willing they have been to speak. So double or even triple sourcing some of these accounts has been remarkably straightforward. And what has stunned me more than anything, I think, in terms of covering the story for about a decade now, is how keen people are actually to speak out, because those voices have been ignored for so long, that finally someone is asking them the question that they have wanted to answer for ages, perhaps for the majority of their lives. So we've been very lucky that sourcing has been possible, evidence has been possible. In some cases, obviously, we've been lucky to find that the CPS has considered something worthy of reaching the threshold for being mentioned in court, which then reaffirms other cases that we've heard. We've also been lucky that some gang members have been foolish enough to be caught in quite basic ways in terms of using cars that are linked to criminality, and that the police have been able to actually do a lot of this work for us in terms of understanding the network and the mapping, which then moves on to your first question. Yes, this is absolutely a national network, and London is a major part of it. And I think it goes into a bit of what I was talking about earlier in terms of clannishness and networks, and that this national network, I mean, previously I think we understood this issue as being isolated to different towns and cities, and I think foolishly and unfortunately we focused very much on Rotherham and Rochdale, a little bit on Telford and a little bit on Oxford, but it was predominantly considered in the public consciousness as something isolated to a few northern towns and cities. I think the great thing that GB News was able to do was demonstrate this is truly a nationwide network, to prove for the first time by collating all of the different prosecutions and some accounts that we brought forward ourselves, just how widespread this was. We also produced some interlinking trafficking mapping, which I can share with you later if you'd like, which shows how interconnected these offenders were according to the geography, and then, and perhaps more disturbingly, how often they were related. What's particularly astonishing about this form of criminality, and people often say it's just it's a tiny fraction of child abuse more generally. It is, but it's pervasive in a particular manner, and it's also poorly understood because of how small it is with regards to the wide range of broader child abuse, is how often you find cousins and brothers, uncles and nephews offending together, even fathers and sons in some circumstances. That is born out of interlinking family crime networks. There are many reasons as to why that might be the case. Unfortunately, very few academics have looked into this. There's been very limited public focus on this. Perhaps it's considered taboo in several circumstances. There is no doubt in my mind that one of the core reasons for those interlinking networks that we're talking about is cousin marriage, a sense of socio-biological kinship, that you generate this greater sense of alliance between close relations and you offend together, and also extreme views within those communities of misogyny and racism, particularly racism towards white girls. That is how these networks are formed.
But is that the experience of London? I mean, we've heard Seema say, and I think other members of the panel say the same thing, that in London, that there is a very, it is, the offending is very, very diverse, and that the offenders themselves are from very diverse backgrounds, and the victim survivors themselves are also from very diverse backgrounds. So your analysis on a national basis, does that apply very specifically to London?
I'll just go back to what I said in previous answers. Yes, there are so many cases that we've found of the trafficking of abusers and victims to and from London. It's true that there are, of course, a wide range of child abuse experiences in the capital. But in this subsection that I've really focused on what we know as sort of group-based child sex exploitation, the grooming gangs model, and within that national network, as we've come to understand it, yes, London is absolutely key to that. I think sometimes we might misunderstand or overlook this trend by virtue of always zooming out and looking at the wider picture. Don't get me wrong, I think all cases are very important. But this particular trend requires an additional degree of focus, I believe, because it has been overlooked and misunderstood for so long. And central to that is the fact that it is a high-trust national network, which I think for ordinary people is quite difficult to get their heads around. How on earth can this sort of high-trust degree of sort of inward-looking clannishness even develop in the first place? It's so alien to our popular consciousness and our understanding of society. But it's prevalent, it's real, and London is very much central to it.
And what is really disturbing about what you said with regard to a national network, I mean, what have you done with this evidence and that information? Who have you passed it to?
I've broadcast all of it.
But have you actually passed it on to any law enforcement agency? I mean, you've obviously got all this evidence. You've said that that's what you've got. Where's it gone?
Well, I'm dealing with cases that a lot of them have already been prosecuted. So there's not much value in me reminding the authorities of what they've already done. I suppose, just to borrow a term you've used before,
but
joining the dots.
What about prevention? I mean, if you've got all this evidence, isn't it right that you pass that on to somebody?
I've broadcast and published all of it. It's publicly available for everyone who wants to access it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Roberts.
Yeah, I was just going to point out with some of that stuff, like for example the Oxford gang, those are in the safeguarding reports saying stuff like there were hundreds of men that were linked to that group in London. So the police already are aware of it. It's kind of, you go to the police and say, are you aware of a report that reports on something that you're involved in? So it can be a bit difficult. It's not like necessarily like you're bringing brand new information that they're not aware of.
I just wanted to add to that. I've spoken to grooming gang victims from places like Telford, and they have said that they were passed around for sex in London. So I think that it's fair to say a lot of these survivors, whether the bulk of their grooming is happening in other parts of the country, they are often brought to London because that is where the clientele sometimes is. So it has been happening in London for decades. This is not new. I just wanted to emphasise that point. And then the second thing, county lines, which Charlie touched on. When we talk about county lines, what I've learned from, again, speaking to many survivors in London is that sometimes survivors are passed around for sex as a way of paying back debt. So that is a model that seems to be coming to my attention, at least, a lot more in recent months. So the grooming is not necessarily like the grooming model in Rotherham or Rochdale. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist in London, because it does. But what I'm hearing a lot of is that these survivors are involved in gangs, and sometimes they are used as a way of paying off a debt to a rival gang. So we haven't got the money to pay you back, but here you go, you can have sex with one of our members. And then the girl goes off and pays off that debt.
And in your investigation, Simon, thank you, that's really helpful, and you, Zach, as well. Again, have you, just like Charlie saying that there is a national network, have you found that evidence? Is it a national network?
Yeah, I mean, it's a national network in the sense that, like I said, if there's a grooming gang, where most of the grooming is going on in a city, somewhere up north, yes, they absolutely have links in London. I mean, these are large gangs in some cases. We're talking about, dozens of perpetrators. We know, and as Zach rightly says, I've just spoken to a woman very recently who was groomed in Oxford, and she was talking about hundreds of perpetrators still being out there, and many of them still being in London. So these groomers have links. They have very active links across the country. So I think it's absolutely fair to say that these are national networks.
Right. OK, that's very enlightening, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I bring in Assemblymember Roberts, I did say in the pre-meet we are going to go over questions that are due to come in next, because I'm very keen that our guests bring up as things come through. So we've actually gone across Assembly Member Best's question. So do you want to come in at this stage before I bring in Assembly Member Roberts?
Yeah, thank you. We've just been talking about how you collated your evidence and validated it. And I think one of the things that ties these grooming cases together is the public institutions and the lack of trust and the overlooking that's happened there. So I wondered, in your investigations, which, by the way, thank you to all the work that all of you have done, in your investigations, did you find in London that there was the same kind of neglect or overlooking in those public institutions? And to what extent is that still happening? Or, because Charlie, you were saying that social workers were actually very keen to bring you evidence, which I suppose recognises a change from what we've seen in other areas in the past. So how open did you find public institutions? I don't know if anyone wants to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Survivors often don't trust people, authorities, police, social workers. They really, it takes a lot for them to even speak to us, let alone speak to people who are actively really trying to help them and change their lives. What I found from my investigation was that there was a hesitancy, if you like, on behalf of some of these girls to tell their stories in such detail that they sometimes told me, that they were worried about stating certain facts to social workers, for example. They were worried about being judged. And I think that looms large. I think there is a real issue with feeling as if you're being judged by people in authority. But saying that, I also agree with Charlie. I mean, in some cases, social workers are right at the heart of this, and they're the ones that are kind of encouraging these girls to go further and to report their cases to the police if they can.
Just to pick up on there, do you see that sort of institutional failure in London where social workers were referring to these predators as boyfriends and things like that? Or so there was still those failings quite present.
Yeah.
And how open were institutions about those failings with you when you were looking for evidence?
Okay.
Absolutely not open at all. I mean, the problem that we have in London is that it became acceptable to just deny that this was happening. The children's services departments at the councils in all of your wards will know that this has happened. And what they did after the scandals in Rochdale and Rotherham is they set up these safeguarding boards. And on paper, they're a really good idea, right? You've got the police in there, you've got children's services, you've got NHS, all the people that should be able to join the dots and bring things together. Big problem is transparency. I can't FOI them. So we don't know what they've done, how effective they've been, and all we know is what they put forward. So I think the thing that really needs to be demanded in London are the same levels of transparency that occurred in Rochdale and Rotherham. There needs to be cleaning of house because, yes, it's the same pattern that you always see, which is the child comes, the social worker will often be, or the children's home will be aware of the abuse that's going on. They'll kind of overlook it or, not deal with it in the correct way. And then actually the only cases often that we know about are the worst ones. Like I've seen in Rachel's work, in the work that we've done, serious case reviews. When the child dies, they cannot hide that information anymore. It ends up on the public record. That is disgraceful that is the only time that we get transparency around what has gone on in some of these areas.
Yeah, I think when we were looking into it, it is really easy to see why there is a distrust of authority among sort of survivors and victims. I think one of the cases that I covered, an 11-year-old girl said she'd been raped. She had 3 STIs by the age of 12. It went to court and the case fell apart. And the report says there is no detail about why it fell apart or why no one was convicted. And, by 17, she had taken her own life. And I think there was quite a few cases like that where there was just either girls that had gone through that kind of experience or were found multiple times with multiple men by police at the age of 14, 15, 16, and then we're just taken back to their care home. We're taken back home or essentially given back to the people that were abusing them. And like Zach said as well, with these safeguarding boards that have been set up, where they have all these people from different institutions, there is a total lack of transparency there about what we can access as journalists. They will do have a big meeting every year, and they will say, okay, we've had 2 cases that have met the threshold for serious case reviews, but there were 22 that didn't quite meet the threshold. But we don't know what those other 22 were. And I think that is a major problem, that there is a total lack of transparency until something actually goes to court. And even if it does go to court, if the case collapses for whatever reason, we don't know the reasons why.
Yeah, I just echo everything that's been said about the institutional decay and the failures that are taking place in these cases. But I'd like to draw out an example from one social worker who has provided a lot of information, as you can understand, entirely confidentially. It's in East London Borough, and you'll appreciate I won't say which one, but this social worker told me, and I have good reason to sort of believe and have reported on their testimony. Again, I won't go into sourcing, etc. But I'm entirely confident in this perspective. They told me that one victim of a grooming gang that they were working with and had been assigned to work with as a social worker was a young Muslim girl, young teenage Muslim girl. And due to NHS confidentiality data, had been unable to share information with that girl's family about pregnancies and rapes and STDs. And further, once that hurdle had been cleared due to concerns about that child's safety, was then told, and this is coming from the social working institution, the social services that this social worker is employed by, was then told, you cannot approach the family about what this young Muslim girl has endured because it would put her at risk of honour-based violence. Now, that is a really dark and dangerous situation to be in. I think it does point to the culture of avoidance that fellow panellists have referred to, and how, regardless of the victim, there always seems to be, and often is, an excuse for why actions aren't taken. And that was one of the more troubling examples I've heard, and quite unique to London as well. I hadn't heard that excuse, or rather that reason given, in other areas that I've covered, and of course there have been hundreds of cases that we've looked at over the last decade or so. So that was a particularly concerning revelation, and it points to, I think, some of the crises that are ongoing and alive. This is a recent case in London at the moment.
Thanks. So just confirm one last thing, because I think obviously the bad people do bad things, right? And but the horrifying layer of this is that the good people have enabled the behaviour. So is that something that you think still happens, or is that not a thing anymore? For example, pet predators classified as boyfriends, police still taking, after seeing victims, either criminalising them or taking them straight back into situations where they're at danger. Is that still happening, or has there been an improvement in that?
Never, ever, let us rest on our laurels and think there's been an improvement. There hasn't. Read the inspectorate reports. They are still littered with these examples. This is such the danger. I know that you've inadvertently done it, but this is the big problem that we have in London, which is that we've said, this doesn't happen here.
To be clear, I think it is happening. I'm asking you to confirm
I didn't say
it.
that you said it deliberately. I said it sort of inadvertently touched on the attitude that has been so damaging in London, which is the mayor sitting here saying no indication that it was going on. No indication. Such a high bar. And he's the top. He sets the tone for the rest of the police. And that's what we need to look at. Like, why did he have no indication? Why did the Met Commissioner say, it's not something I see? Because we know that it's been going on.
Assemblymember Roberts.
Good morning. Could I ask you all, for the purposes of your investigations, what definition of grooming gangs did you use, and what criteria determined whether a case was included or excluded from your investigations? Anybody?
So I think grooming gangs is quite a difficult term for the public as well, because I think when somebody says grooming gangs, people automatically think of what's happened in Rochdale and Rotherham, and that's not necessarily the case in terms of my journalism. When I talk about grooming gangs, I'm talking about young people being used for sex by groups of men, but the model is not necessarily the same. So for me, I was looking at, as I explained to Marina, forgive me, a little while ago, that for me there was also a county lines model that was very apparent. And as I explained, that means girls being exchanged for sex in terms of paying off debt. So being passed around as a debt payment. And also, I did see from many of the survivors I spoke to, the Rotherham-Rochdale model also very apparent, where large groups of South Asian men were using girls for sex. And that was it. There were no drugs involved. It was just being passed around for sex. So for me, there was a more kind of wider definition, and as a journalist, it's my responsibility to explain that to the audience as to what I'm talking about. But I wasn't just sticking to that kind of narrow definition, as many people might think of when we do talk about grooming gangs.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. It's something that we did think a lot about when we were going through this publicly available material. And what we did was completely agree with what Sima said, which is it's the pattern of behaviour that you see from the group, you know, the group-based child sexual abuse. What we did was, when we had a case that we said, that looks a lot like a grooming gang, we went to Maggie Oliver, the Greater Manchester Police, whistleblower detective, because she's someone that's dedicated her life to understanding what a grooming gang is. So every single case that we described as a grooming gang, we had checked with her. And she said, she would say, I mean, she couldn't say definitively, but she said, based on her experience, that is the pattern of a grooming gang.
Okay, thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, so we did a similar thing in that when we got these reports, there was obviously lots of reports about horrendous things that had happened to children. And we looked at them all and we took out the ones that were like, okay, there are multiple offenders in this report. This child has been found several times with multiple men. Police have said that, they have been involved in criminal behaviour a lot of the time, or what they classified as criminal behaviour, and often that they were in care and vulnerable. So we sort of separated them out that way, and then we went to some charity workers and social workers in West and North London and went through the reports with them. And they said, yeah, this looks like this child has been groomed over a number of years. And we filtered them out that way. But we found, I mean, like Seema was saying, that there wasn't the pattern that we've seen in sort of Rochdale, Telford. It was more widespread in the capital in terms of the race of offenders and the race of victims as well. And we also found that there was, it was linked to county lines, and there was also, young boys that were also victims. It wasn't just girls. There were, there was workers, and there was one victim who told us that he had been part of a county lines gang at a very young age. He had been sexually assaulted. It had been filmed, and then it was used as sort of a way of blackmailing him, almost to get him further involved in criminal activity. So there was a sort of, it was quite a large scope, but essentially it was those multiple men, multiple victims, and sort of pattern of behaviour that we used for each case.
Okay, thank you. Charlie?
Any case of group-based child sexual abuse with elements of the grooming model of exploitation.
Okay, thank you. One of the issues that gets raised fairly regularly on particularly social media, you know how it is is that there does tend to be a focus on ethnicity, that there is a high reporting of South Asian exploitation, and that white grooming gangs don't get nearly the level of coverage as some of the South Asian gangs. Is that something which you're familiar with? Do you have views on that? Is anybody to answer?
Well, when we look at other places in the country, we have seen predominantly South Asian men carrying out this disgusting behaviour. What I have found in London, I said this right at the start, and I just want to be clear, because I'm not here to take political sides. No. For me, it's just to talk about my journalism. What I have found from talking to survivors is that there have been white women who have been groomed by South Asian men in London because of their skin colour. They have been told things like, you are a sexy white girl, you are easy, you are more adventurous because you are white. And I have been told that. But I have also spoken to many survivors who have been groomed by white men in the capital. And those men may also be Turkish, Albanian, as I mentioned earlier. So exactly what Rachel just said, the makeup of perpetrators in the capital reflects the population. It's the most cosmopolitan population in the country. Therefore, you would guess that the ethnicity of the perpetrators reflects that. So it would be unfair to say that there is only one ethnic group that is carrying out these violent acts in London. But I'm not shying away from saying that the model that does exist in some Yorkshire places or in Oxford or in Telford does not exist in London, because I'm pretty sure it
evidently does, given your investigation. Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I completely second what's been said, which is we've got it all here. We've got it all. We've got the same types. The difference is London is different, right? You've got to think about the scale and the demographics of a place like, Rochdale, or it was actually Hayward, so that's even a smaller, a lot of where the most famous case was, even smaller kind of village, basically. You've got to think about how complicated London is. The other point that I think is very important to make is with the survivors as well, because the survivors are as diverse as London, and actually it just gets lost sometimes in people come from all groups, and I've seen that repeatedly in the gangs that I've been digging into. I mean, and let's just be honest about it. Like, the worst of the worst, they group together, and they don't care a lot of the time where the other may have come from ethnically.
Okay, thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, exactly the same. When I was looking into it, there was no one race or nationality in terms of the perpetrators or the victims. I think it reflects London, the diversity of London, and it went across communities.
Okay, thank you. Charlie, anything to it?
I just push back on this suggestion that there is a lack of focus on white group-based abuse gangs.
No, as a perception.
Yeah, I just push back against that in general. That perception is wrong. Just immediately springs to mind that the Beastie House case in Glasgow last year, for example, got widespread media attention. Perhaps, in fact, because they are relatively rarer in some of these towns and cities. And in fact, I've been to several trials where there have been particularly Pakistani or Mirpuri and Bangladeshi grooming gangs, and perhaps the coverage has been very muted because they are so commonplace in those towns. It no longer becomes interesting to report on the 65th or 70th prosecution in a borough of the same model of abuse. So I'd push back on that perception, and I'd forth what we've already heard so far in terms of the case in London. Nothing to add on that.
Okay. And one final question, if I may, Chair, is the term grooming gangs. Do you think that aids public understanding of the issue? I mean, when I was much younger, which I'm terribly ancient now, I mean, the term used to be paedophile rings, and that was a very clear definition of what we were talking about. But now we seem to be blurring into county lines. We're talking about child sexual exploitation. Do you think that the term grooming gangs is helpful, or a hindrance?
Yeah, I think it can be confusing. And I think, as I said, as a journalist, it's our responsibility to make sure people understand exactly what we're talking about, because it can be a very complex picture. Also, the term grooming, we associate it, or many people associate it with sex, but anybody could be groomed by anything. You know, I'm working on a piece about cuckooing at the moment, and people are being groomed in that soon-to-be crime. So we have to explain it. But yeah, I think grooming gangs has been hijacked by the majority of people as being associated with, you know, South Asian predators using girls for sex. And I think we need to make sure that we explain it clearly every time we speak about it, because the picture, as all of us have said, is incredibly complex.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a bit of a tricky one, because I think it's like you can just get bogged down in the sort of linguistics of it, right? And that, what's the result of that? Inaction a lot of the time. And I think, again, that's one of the problems that we've had in London, and why we've said that there's been this kind of sense of, well, we don't have exactly what is here, and this is how we're going to define it in this very strict way. And actually, what it's encouraging to hear from everyone on this panel, and the, you know, the questions that are coming in, which is like, let's look at this problem in all of itself and not get bogged down into, well, that has to be exactly the same as that, otherwise we're not taking it seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. It has become a sort of catch-all term that means, you know, Pakistani paedophile rings in the northwest, and here in London has come to mean, you know, county lines. So yeah, it is difficult. It has become this sort of catch-all term, but yeah, like Seema said, it is just our responsibility to explain every case as it comes.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think it's really important that when we talk about grooming gangs that we are actually being very specific about a model of exploitation. That meaning has been lost in some cases. Wherever there's a case of gang abuse, sometimes people will falsely attach the term grooming gang where no grooming has actually taken place. Sometimes we're just talking about attacks where the grooming model of exploitation hasn't occurred. I think it is an important term, and there has been criticism of those who use it because they don't think it's a severe enough term. For example, you know, some people will often criticise journalists for using the term grooming gangs, so they think actually you should say rape gangs instead. But actually, no, it does point to a very specific form of criminality where children are coerced into believing that they are appreciated or loved in a way that they are not otherwise in their lives, perhaps, or they are hooked on alcohol, drugs, or even as something as small as just access to sweets, vapes, cigarettes. We've seen a lot of reporting by the BBC, by Ed Thomas on vapes and how those are being used in corner shops around the country, for example, to create a new form of grooming-based sexual exploitation. So I do think it has to be reserved as a term for where we have that evidence. I think it is unhelpful when it's used as a catch-all to refer to all forms of group-based abuse. There are some cases in county lines, for example, where perhaps the level of grooming isn't really understood and people just call them grooming gangs. Perhaps they're not. We've got to be precise about it, I think.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I hope anybody watching that hasn't believed that these such things exist are actually listening to all of you from your different perspectives, that it damn well does exist, and it's much worse than I think lots of people think. So the next set of questions are going to be about the characteristics of victim survivors. And I'll start with Assemblymember Small Edwards, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. What characteristics, vulnerabilities or circumstances were common among the victim survivors that you've all spoken to? We can start with Seema and then potentially go along the panel.
I think it can be quite broad. I think there is a misconception that all survivors are of a certain type, and that misconception is white, working class, uneducated, because I've spoken to survivors who don't fit that mould at all. So I think we need to be really careful that, you know, we don't stereotype, because this is about manipulation, this is about grooming, this is about those individuals having some sort of vulnerability that is taken advantage of. And that vulnerability could just be feeling like they're not getting enough attention at home. So I had one survivor who just felt that her mum was a workaholic, Her very middle-class family. Mum had a very professional job. She was working a lot. Her father died when she was younger. And she just felt that her mum didn't have time for her. And suddenly she met a group of girls and they introduced her to a group of men. And before she knew it, she was going to see these men every night and she was being passed around for sex. And she was doing really well at school, you know, clever girl, went to a good school, lived in a nice area. Nothing about her said what many might think, that, you know, she comes from a broken home, parents have no money, she's white and working class. No. So I think we just need to be careful that we don't stereotype. It really can happen to anybody who has some sort of vulnerability or is looking for something. I mean, it could just be boredom. You know, I've had some survivors who are just bored with life and they were just like, they felt there was a gap and that they were looking for something to fill that gap. And that was just wanting to feel wanted by men, you know, craving that attention.
Just to follow up on that before we progress on to your colleagues on the panel, how in those cases are people approached, and how do the perpetrators identify them when it's quite a singular case like that?
Well, she told me that she had some friends, so she was in this tight-knit circle. One of the girls in that circle knew these men, and she was introduced to the men, and then she started hanging out with these girls a lot more often, and they were going to see these men all the time, and it, you know, very quickly developed into her having sex with all these men. I think it's really also important to say that a lot of these survivors don't realise they're being groomed. It takes a while for them to actually realise something is not right here. So she went on with it for ages. She was, in her head, she was having a great time. She was being plied with drugs and alcohol. She was off her face. She felt popular with these men who were older, and she thought, oh, I'm getting attention. They were telling her how beautiful she is. And it took her a while before she actually realised that she was being groomed and that she was being, you know, taken advantage of and being raped, basically. And I think, you know, that's another thing that I'm sure the people on the panel have noticed as well, that a lot of these survivors don't necessarily know that they are being taken advantage of, that they are being manipulated, that they are being groomed, until a little while on.
Thank you very much, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, that is just bang on, which is this can happen to anyone, and the only commonality you see is vulnerability. I do think it's worth saying that the reason that there is focus on the children in care homes are because they have the fewest people to advocate for them, and they are supposed to be being protected by a kind of state structure that so often doesn't protect them. It actually enables the abuse. So kind of answering your question, it is just, it can happen to anyone. But I do think in London, and this is what I come back to with the councils and their children's services departments, they need to dig into where things went wrong and where things are continuing to go wrong, because we know that this does continue. And we know that oftentimes people that work in the care homes will be involved with these groups.
So as much as you're saying it can happen to anyone, you think it's more prevalent in terms of people who are in the care system in London?
They're more, by definition, they're more vulnerable, aren't they? So it's like it can happen to anyone, but it's vulnerability. These groups, these individuals, they prey on vulnerability. The route in, as Seema says, it's not necessarily of it. You know, a lot of the time these guys will be like, introduce me to your friends, right? And that's how they get in there. So it could be someone that's from way outside that you wouldn't expect. The commonality is vulnerability. That's what they prey on. And where the vulnerability is the highest, that's where you'll find a large number of victims, in my experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was a broad spectrum of victims, but a lot had been a part of the care system at some point, and that is predominantly because they are more vulnerable. They are easier to target for these gangs. The gangs kind of know where they are as well. We also looked at cases where there were people hanging outside pupil referral units, and because they know that the kids going in there and coming out of there have had some problems, have maybe been sort of, don't have friends at mainstream school. So there is that way of targeting those those kinds of children, children that have grown up perhaps in chaotic families and have experience of the care system. They are just easier targets, but it is easy for other children to fall into it as well.
I suppose we've heard this before already in terms of how London is different, in terms of the cosmopolitan element of both perpetrators and victims. I think across the country we do still have an overrepresentation of working class white girls. It's not to say there aren't other victims, of course, but when you just look at the raw data from so many of these cases, that is undoubtedly the most prevalent in this sort of specific form of grooming gang offending. I would actually say the commonality among those victims isn't necessarily vulnerability according to class, but actually, perhaps more disturbingly, their race. And there are plenty of middle-class victims we've not heard from, for example, perhaps due to the additional cost of the punishment that they might feel socially from expressing what has happened to them with the crime that's been associated so much, not just with the working class, but actually people talk about this in terms of like a white underclass in some of these northern towns. And to be associated with that, I think it is an additional barrier for some of those victims to come forward. We know, for example, in Rotherham, of one family that fled to Spain in order to escape a gang's abuse. In London, it is more diverse, but in terms of the victims that have spoken to me about their experiences of London from out of the capital, that national overrepresentation still exists. They mostly come from that background. That is white working class trafficked to London for the purposes of abuse with those interlinking gangs. When I have gathered evidence of abuse inside the capital, it's more diverse. I refer back to that case I gave earlier of the young Muslim girl who was pregnant by her abusers but was unable to get the support that she needed.
Thank you all very much. And just in terms of, is there any data available either within London or nationally of what proportion of people, say, have been in the care system who have been abused in this way?
So the problem that we have in London is that we've just not got a handle on this issue. I mean, the reason that you've got journalists that are sat in front of you today is because there's not been an acknowledgement of this issue in London. So we've not, therefore, had the kind of studies, the reports that need to, you know, in places like Rochdale and Rotherham, there have been massive reckonings, there have been independent inquiries. We've not had that. So we're providing you with the information because there aren't those other people that might be able to come in and give you more information on that. Well, that was certainly in my experience.
Yeah, it's, I mean, we know how many children that are looked after by London boroughs in a mixture of foster care and children's homes. There are not a lot of children's homes in London. Many are shipped out to other places, which is another big problem for the city. You know, the Met Police also released data that shows how many children go missing each year, and you can see that that is that's split up by race, and you can see that there is a big there's a broad spectrum of people of different races, children of different races going missing every year. But yeah, the data certainly does need to improve.
Thank you very. Oh, sorry, Charlie.
The data is a complete shambles. None of it's reliable nationwide, and so many false conclusions have been drawn from data that is hugely incomplete. I mean, last year, Baroness Casey's review into grooming gangs nationally, you know, concluded that so many police forces had just not recorded ethnicity for perpetrators, and that's also an issue for victims as well. So trying to understand the data in terms of the background of victims is so difficult because of how often there has been a buck-passing culture among the organisations that are meant to gather this. The police at the forefront of that, I believe. They're meant to get all this data and have failed. And if it's so difficult on that ethnicity point, imagine it is for the minutiae of little data sets beneath that as well. Some more intricate analysis about who the victims are, where they come from, what's caused this. It's so difficult to draw conclusions because of that. The best understanding we have, I think, is just through the sheer amount of news gathering that's been done on it now. That's been able to give us a better sense of this. But yeah, the data's horrendous, and it has been for decades. We've seen huge conclusions brought in most notoriously by the Home Office report in 2020 in this, that made a totally false conclusion based on a lack of data, which has rightly been criticised now by Baroness Casey last year. But we saw it with previous Children's Commissioner reports as well, about a decade ago, some older than that as well, where didn't have much data, but then made bold conclusions about what we know about victims and perpetrators. I think unless there is sort of mandatory changes, which I think are now coming, finally, or they've been announced several times by different governments, that isn't going to change until that's brought in.
Yeah, just sort of seconding that. Please push it with the police about their data, because when I've spoken to whistleblowers specifically on this point to do with data, they say that it's been a shambles going back decades, and you often hear senior police officers making quite bold statements, and I really struggle when I see that to be like, what is that based on? And I would really encourage you guys, when you get those officers sat here, grill them on it, push them on it, try and find out more. If they are able to make these conclusions because they have good data that we don't know about it, can they explain it?
And just one more thing to that, sorry. There's been much debate recently, I think, about the use of technology in recording data. In London, there's been much debate around the tech firm Palantir, for example. I think the various wings of crime fighting and governance in London clearly have a long way to go until they achieve a minimum standard that's acceptable in terms of tackling group-based abuse. I think, for a lot of victims and survivors, perhaps it is quite concerning to see some grandstanding against services that could be used to really change this, to make a serious step forward in terms of collating data, because it's a difficult thing to do. And if there are people who can change that for London and make it easier nationwide, then that should be perhaps considered more seriously rather than just like rejected out of hand entirely. And I think that's true for all police forces in the country. The National Crime Agency is currently doing Operation Beacon Port, this national effort to reinvestigate cold cases. And I think what was most concerning for us was our network mapping work at GB News was seriously rudimentary network analysis. It was really, Billy Basic stuff. But it was done because the data collection had not been done previously. And maybe there are technologies and efforts that could be made to improve that. Stuff that human error can't make.
Just stay on the policing point, I believe Chair will be coming to questions later on the handling of this by the police and potentially, bringing the police in as part of the investigation. Thank you very much for your responses.
Absolutely, and we will be asking the questions. Can I just briefly, before I bring in the next Assembly member, I'm mindful of the fact that we are talking about girls all the time. I've unfortunately come across a couple of boys that have been seriously abused. Have you come across that? I'll start with Charlie, because it keeps coming that way.
Yeah, absolutely we have. I think also we've spoken about perpetrators all being men. That's not true either, particularly for the facilitation of grooming and how women are often used by gangs to procure other victims. And those women are willing participants. They're not so-called alpha victims, as they're referred to, victims who gather other victims, which all of us have spoken about so far, those who are groomed and exploited into introducing those perpetrators to other victims. Adult women are also doing that on behalf of the perpetrators, but they are doing so for their own gain, for their own pleasure, for their own status within those communities. That's really an additional level of sort of disturbing criminality that I think has been overlooked many times, but it's a key part of this nationwide. But yes, in terms of victims, lots of men and boys caught up in this as well. I think it also goes against a little bit of this, the nationally networked crime syndicate discussion we've been having. A lot of boys that we have encountered as part of this work who've been abused by the gangs, often they come from the same communities as those perpetrators. So there is a lot of sort of inter-Pakistani abuse within these gangs, often with children of family members. That was also drawn out of the report in Rotherham by Alexis Jane 2014. It's a key element that needs to be focused, and those voices have to be included in this discussion as well, that actually a lot of the perpetrators abuse their own family members as well, or sort of intercommunal sexual violence as well. But boys are a key part of that, and of course there were also many boys. I'm thinking of a case in Greater Manchester, for example, where a boy was caught up in these abuse gangs. I can't go into further details at the moment, but that is a trend that's obviously less common, but still prevalent as well.
Yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, I've definitely come across boys that are victims, particularly in sort of gangs that are linked to county lines drug dealing. We spoke to some social workers who told us that, I think I mentioned before, that sexual abuse is used to blackmail these boys because they're from communities where if you were sexually assaulted, that would be very emasculating. So they are abused, it is filmed, and then that is used as a sort of means to blackmail them into doing other crimes. And then sometimes these victims go on to become perpetrators themselves as they get older. So it certainly is something that goes on, and there is obviously a focus on young girls because I think of the previous reporting on grooming gangs in the Northwest. But certainly I've come across boys as well.
Zach.
Yeah, I mean, most of it has been covered by Charlie and Rachel. But, one of the methods that was known to be going on in West London was that young men who were part of a drugs gang would be given gift girls for completing a particular task. They may well be underage themselves. Obviously, the girls were not doing this. They were being coerced. They were not doing this willingly. But you immediately, that what Rachel describes in terms of the blackmail, that is built in to the business model or the kind of operating manual that these groups will have, and the kind of, it tends to be that the boys are criminally exploited and the girls are sexually exploited. But there is definitely overlap on both sides.
Okay. Thank you very much, Assembly Member Hamdash.
Thank you, Chair. Just before my question, I want to share a reflection. I think Zach helpfully highlighted the issue about safeguarding boards and their lack of transparency. Before this role, I used to work for an international children's charity, and a part of our regular reporting would include number of safeguarding reports, what were the nature of them, how many were upheld. Some of that was introduced in the wake of the awful, horrible crimes that we saw in Haiti. So I wonder whether there's a task for us as a committee to go away and look at the level of transparent reporting, what's statutory, and what can we learn from, unfortunately, those awful instances. So I think that's really helpful. My question is, did you find any evidence to suggest a link between children going missing and grooming gangs? And I think, Rachel, you had a helpful reflection earlier that touched on this. Maybe if we start there.
Yeah, there was in my reporting certainly a link, particularly when we were using the serious case reviews and child safeguarding practice reviews in multiple, in almost all of them. These were girls that had gone missing multiple times before. They had, from very young ages, sometimes from the age of 11, 12, they had been reported missing from care, or they were put into care because they were repeatedly going missing from their homes. And then when they were taken out of their homes and away from their families, because for whatever reason, they just went missing from care all the time. And there is a constant, because there's not enough children's homes, there's not enough foster placements, they are moved around a lot, so they never get settled anywhere a lot of the time. And it was a constant repeating pattern of child reported missing, 3 days later found with a group of men, taken back to a care home, put in another home. Same thing goes on over and over again.
Yeah, I think it's the first indicator, isn't it, when the child is. It's kind of the first one where it's like if they're in a care home that it pops up. I mean, it might have been going on for a lot longer, but that's the first kind of recorded instance. And yes, it is so important, as Rachel says, when you are looking at the pattern of how these groups operate. The missing children is always a component within it. It's really refreshing to hear you make that reflection in terms of transparency. What I would also add to that is with the serious case reviews, we need to have local authorities need to be forced to disclose this, because at the moment there's this really weird optional system about how much is anonymised. I think what it needs to be is standardised, and that it should, you know, if a local authority has had major failings in a serious case review, they should not be able to hide that. And I think it's the NSPCC is responsible for the library of it. Look, they do as good a job as they can, but we need to take that and put that somewhere else, so that though in the worst possible cases we're not even keeping that information, which is already being produced, in a way that is properly accessible to people that live in the borough, lawyers, you know, all these other people that those cases might be very important to before you even get down to the layer of journalists.
I'll obviously echo the points about children going missing. But you know, there have been so many cases where actually I didn't realise that the children had been going missing because oversight on them was so limited. I think particularly of households with just one parent, for example, or where teachers weren't especially involved. We expect teachers to do so much nowadays, don't we? They're expected to essentially be a third parent or a second parent, or even a first for some children, right? We give them so many expectations, responsibilities about teaching parents teaching kids how to brush their teeth these days. To also expect them to have a major safeguarding role in terms of understanding what's happening to them outside the classroom, that sometimes is very difficult. It is obviously an indicator and warning in several circumstances, but it's often missed, actually, quite disturbingly. Is it something that needs statutory additional guidance? So can you just help me work out what you meant by that? As in, do the police or social services need additional guidance or clarifications or actions they need to take?
I was just reflecting on Zach's comments about the safeguarding boards and the level of transparency there, and for us to go away and investigate that. But yeah, any reflections on that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What are other reflections or things to take away in terms of prosecuting how these institutions work, including the police? Obviously, a consistent trend in many of the towns throughout the country on this is a nervousness about rocking the boat with regards to so-called community cohesion, or concerns about overrepresentation of offending according to different ethnicities and communities. I think you will undoubtedly find that same reticence and nervousness in London as you have found throughout the country. I would invite you all to prosecute any policies or guidelines or language, such as perhaps a race action plan that's in the news at the moment, which takes issue with the overrepresentation of offending or sees any outcomes in offending as a problem that needs to be solved rather than an issue that needs to be understood. That is having a really grave impact in terms of people wanting to fully understand a cause. That quietened and chilled investigation in these sorts of abuse gangs for decades. It's still going on. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. We've seen politicians and people in serious positions of authority doubt the role of ethnicity, religion, culture, clannishness, as recently as this year. Very senior politicians, some indeed in the House of Commons. And I think that needs to be tackled. I would invite you all, please, to look into any language policies or guidance that might add to that culture of silencing, of chilling, and of reducing investigation where it occurs.
Just a follow-up question from me, because I think some really helpful reflections about the links between missing children and abuse. I'm very conscious that very high rates of missing children are reported among unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and that actually quite often councils are quite dismissive about these children going missing because it's seen as people going back to family or communities. It does strike me as a community that might be particularly vulnerable to abuse, and perhaps a group that's particularly difficult to reach. I wonder whether in your cases, whether you'd seen any kind of children from these categories unfortunately falling prey to these predators?
I haven't covered any of those cases personally, but when I was speaking to some of the charity workers, particularly those working in West London, where there is a high volume of asylum hotels, it was mentioned, and it was mentioned that they were particularly vulnerable, but I personally haven't covered any of those cases.
It's interesting because that Guardian report that I mentioned at the beginning specifically cited that group as being there. If a child has been trafficked to this country, then they are already within a trafficking network, right? So the potential of them being trafficked again is high.
Third that. So tremendous risk factor.
Just one more follow-up question for me, Chair. I'd love to kind of ask how much this is a symptom of a broken care system and how, actually we need a proper reckoning with the amount of money that we invest in to look after children. I've always been struck as a local councillor how much it's drilled into us that we are corporate parents, and yet to hear this on a scale is just truly horrifying, and to think about the children that are most vulnerable, where we have the most responsibility to be let down in such a horrific way. So to what level of conversations with social workers and an analysis of the care system do we need to really invest in looking after the children we're meant to look after?
The care system is on the precipice of collapse, essentially. It is not functioning. And it's also costing local authorities more money than ever. Putting children in care, looking after them, is driving some local authorities in London to the brink of bankruptcy. And they are not getting anywhere near the care that they deserve or should be getting. And as I think we've all said, that it is a significant risk factor. Children in care are more likely to fall victim to these gangs and to become involved in criminal behaviour and become a victim of it as well. So, when you say sort of more funding, obviously a council's always going to ask for more funding, but there needs to be a total overhaul, I think, of the way the system is run. And the people I've talked to who work in that system have all said essentially they're just putting out fires every day, and there is no room or time for them to make any real change in the way that it's set up at the moment.
Yeah, I think I completely second that, which is it's like we're getting terrible value for money on what it is, and children at risk, which is the nightmare scenario. I think it's that is a really good point that that Rachel makes, which is that you will have some amazing people within the care system, actually some of the most incredible people, and that it's not that they don't want to protect these children, it's that they can't protect those children. And I also think the transparency point comes in as well, which is that, for obvious reasons, we're not allowed to report on the family courts. I know things are opening up and things are changing, but so often we do not know the systemic problems, the extent of them, because there are these blockers with transparency. And I do think if we opened it up and we could really look at these things in greater detail, we'd be able to see where the problems lie and then have some shot at trying to kind of push that boulder, very, very big boulder up the hill.
Yeah, it may not shock you to hear me adding to that perspective from the journalists on the panel demanding more transparency and more opportunity to ethically and robustly report on this issue in general. Because when you do sort of lift up the floorboards in this issue, so much horror comes out. I mean, probably the worst story I worked on last year was a convicted grooming gang abuser called Abid Yunus in Leeds. Only went away for 2.5 years. For a sexual assault of a child. He owned a property that was being converted into a children's care home. Now, how on earth is that possible? And what does that say about the regulatory oversight and the actions being taken in the local authority to vet people involved in this process? Now, I'm happy to say that after that was exposed, things rather fell apart there, and that business proposal didn't go ahead. But it got quite far down the line, and there was, I've got to be careful what I say here in terms of who knew what and when, but I think there was a degree of understanding about who he was among people who should have done more to deal with that. And we only knew about that because, some local brave person put their hand up and said, this is corrupt and scary. Imagine how many other cases there are like that we don't know about. I am concerned also about how decisions are made in terms of councils affording who gets to be involved in the care sector and who is allowed to convert their home into a care home. That seems remarkably smooth and perhaps sometimes criminal in some cases.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best will be finishing off this section, and then we will have a 5-minute comfort break.
Just a quick question, Zach. Following up on what you said earlier about, and I think, Charlie's, you've now opened another can of worms on this as well, but people within the care sector being involved, either through facilitating or direct involvement within the gang. How big of an issue is that in London?
Absolutely massive. Absolutely massive. One of the issues is because it's a wild west out there in terms of some of these care homes, and they can be very easily infiltrated by people with bad intentions. And get some people from the care sector, up here and ask them, because they will lay it out for you in greater detail with a raft of cases. When we took the grooming gang cases, we took them to Maggie Oliver, but we also took them to a guy called Chris Wilde, who's really an amazing campaigner and within the care space. And what was so chilling about what he would say was he'd look through them and go, "Oh, well, that's very common. Yeah, that I know about 20 of those." It's absolutely huge. But yeah, in terms of people on the inside, it's terrifyingly massive. And then it comes down to that transparency part, which is it's only when we get whistleblowers that come forward. We don't really know how many investigations there might have taken place into this stuff because they don't have to make it public.
Thanks. Charlie, is there anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think within the care sector, in terms of frontline workers, there are so many instances that we've seen, both in the capital, and fellow panellists have gone through those already, but also around the country, of just horrendous attitudes among some frontline workers, deeply misogynistic, judgmental of the children they're caring for, see them as troublemakers who can't be contained, basically, and what they get is what they deserve if they fail to follow the rules. I mean, that is the attitude that we've seen time and time again in so many cases. Luckily, some of them quite a while ago now. You'd hope that some attitudes have improved. But there are also, of course, untold numbers of frontline workers who are trying their hardest. But I don't think we appreciate the threat that some of them are facing, the risk that they're enduring. It's not just about, trying to do the right thing. It's, if I do the right thing, might I be the victim of a violent attack? For the second time, I'll praise great work by the BBC today, but recently a report they did in terms of high street crime investigators, standards and licensing dealing with vape shops, organised criminal gangs that use these stores for widespread criminal activity were threatening these investigators, phoning them up at midnight saying, "I will kill you." There's no doubt in my mind that care workers who are causing trouble will be facing that same level of intimidation. We have seen similar cases like it around the country. Some of the social workers I spoke to you about before who wanted to come forward did so because enough time had passed. They no longer felt so much at risk to do so. They're no longer working in the sector. They no longer had that responsibility. I think that's something we need to understand. And again, we are relying on whistleblowers there, of course, and those who are very cautious about sharing these cases. But it does happen. If you see, cars pulling up to your care home and you know that the men taking children away are ruthless, organised criminal gangs involved in serious violence and drug dealing, the movement of heroin and guns, and you are a care worker, who's going to take that fight on?
Thanks. And just, yeah.
I'll just add one point to that, which is to do with just how aggressive some of these care companies can be to whistleblowers with legal threats and all the rest of it. And what we really need to be doing, and this goes beyond care, we need to protect whistleblowers in this country. Like, far too often, they are left to take it all on their shoulders. And we, as journalists, often have to kind of, we try and persuade them to do it, but ultimately it's their choice. And I think in the care sector, when a whistleblower comes forward, that is really difficult. And they often know that there will be people with a vested interest, sometimes with a criminal interest, that will try to silence them.
Thanks. And Charlie, I just wanted to build on a point you were raising around the licensing. That sound in that case like there might have been something slightly more untoward, but on a general point, officers can find it quite difficult within the way the class use system is at the moment. They're so broad, and you are hands tied in terms of somebody might be related to a family member which you know has had a proper premises that hasn't worked, but you can't stop that new family member, even though you're so aware it's all going to be linked, from having a licensed premises. So to what degree do you think that the system itself needs to be overhauled to give officers more power, even if they aren't acting untowardly?
To a great degree, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. It's a lot to take in. It's quite terrible. I intend to have a 5-minute break now. If we could come back at 11:45. Welcome back to the Police and Crime Committee. Our next section is going to be about the characteristics of offenders. I know some of this has been touched on, Assemblymember Wilson, but if you'd like to put your questions, and we'll see.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and welcome back, panel. Yes, as the Chair said, you've already started to talk about this in some detail about the kind of profile and characteristics of the perpetrators, the offenders, but I do have a couple of things I'd like to pick up on what was said in the earlier session. So in particular, the case has been made that London is quite different, the profile of both the victims and the perpetrators. But one of the points, I think, Charlie, that you made, you drew attention to a kind of, there being gaps in the national data and the figures from the Casey audit showing that 2/3 of offenders, there was no ethnic data. But I'm trying to understand why those police forces have not collected that data. Firstly, why have they not collected it? Secondly, is there a way that effectively that can be backfilled, given that presumably these are identified, known suspects, people who've been charged, convicted? There must be a way of kind of backfilling that. But thirdly, from a London perspective, is the Met one of those forces that has been failing to collect that data?
Because I think it is a nationwide issue in terms of the failure to collect. When it comes to backfilling, it's a really interesting question. I think one of the problems we've got in that is that I think police forces ask perpetrators to self-declare ethnicity. And recently we have seen a change in the guidance from the National Police Chiefs Council in terms of information forces are allowed to share publicly when someone has been charged, when there is sufficient interest in a case. I could think about a charging decision made for 7 Afghan refugees in Norwich a couple of weeks ago, where all of the men gave a self-declared ethnicity, according to the constabulary in Norfolk. So I think backfilling is highly unlikely to be possible because of how much it requires the perpetrator's perspective. And I don't think they're going to go back through those cases and ask it. Yes, I think London is caught up in this crisis, but I think one of the problems we've got nationally is how few of the perpetrators we actually know. I think about the cases we've discussed so far today in terms of offending in London. There are some cases where girls have spoken about how they've been abused by hundreds of men. Only a handful ever get charged because only the CPS and the police are only able to gather an evidentiary threshold against a core set of facilitators, often those who visit and pay to have sex with those girls, as was the case in Oxford, where girls were trafficked to London Paddington and then beyond. That was a child abuse ring where girls were sold within that network of fellow offenders. You're not going to get the police, I think, and we haven't seen this ever, giving a theory on who those men might be. But people will naturally come to their own understanding through what victims might say in court testimony, in pre-recorded videos, or what they say afterwards when they come and speak to the media in some cases. When we've had cases nationally of sort of men queuing around corridors to access girls who've been trafficked around the country, including to London. And they have shared details that the offenders generally belong to the same community as those perpetrators in those cases. So we can get a decent understanding, but in terms of backfilling, I think not a chance.
Yeah, I agree with Charlie. There is not enough data on the perpetrators and the sort of ethnicities or nationalities of them. That is changing. I think police forces have been told to make more of an effort now to record that data properly. So the Met will be among those. What you find as well is even when we've been looking at the reports, these serious case reviews and things, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the victim is their ethnicity or their nationality background is recorded, but it's very, very rare that the men abusing them is ever recorded, that information is ever recorded about them. So it would be good to see it not just from police forces, but because some of those cases, they met a threshold to become a serious case review or to have a report written about them, but there was often never any sort of criminal charges or court cases collapsed in those cases. So it would be good to see that data also put into those reports and used by social services, NHS and the health bodies as well.
I mean, Zach, in the earlier session, you kind of highlighted the possibility or the risk of people making pronouncements, but without necessarily having real data to back that up. And I know our own commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has told this assembly something mirroring what has been said about the background being very much more mixed and reflecting the sort of broader diversity of London. But is there the data to back that up? Is there a risk of making those sort of presumptions without having that data? But does it match in replacement for cold hard data? Does it match the cases that you have been aware of and that have covered?
So all of us have, I think, said the same thing, which is the Rochdale-Rotherham thing, we've got it here, but we've also got a whole load of other stuff too, right? What I was astonished by was that the mayor came out very quickly when this was reported on and said, we don't have it like it's in the northern towns. I don't believe that he's retracted that statement. But then subsequently, Mark Rowley, when he was sat here, said it's part of the picture. So what happened, that the mayor was able to say that and the commissioner was able to say something completely different. And this is how we answer this question, because you would hope that they are pulling it from somewhere. But what's the communication? Where is this? And the answer is, we just really don't know. I mean, one of my understanding in terms of some of the way that this is recorded is that Met Police officers will determine what ethnicity someone has based on looking at them, right? Or it's a self-declaration thing, which that seems incredibly problematic. So yeah, I think we need to be forensically going through where people have made bold statements about this and then find out how they have been able to or why they did that.
We were all astonished that I know the chair will remember that meeting with the mayor very well when raising this issue, and he pretending, but certainly claiming that this wasn't an issue in London at all, and that back and forth was really quite remarkable.
Can I just say something on that as well? I mean, on the point that the Rotherham Rochdale stuff hasn't happened here, which of course we know isn't the case. We've all done reporting to reaffirm that it is, but it was already, and it has been for over a decade, a matter of public record that exact same model has been occurring in the capital. And I think we really need to understand it's not a recent trend. It's decades of the Rotherham Rochdale model happening in London as well, with perhaps the most disturbing evidence being the detail we've heard from court transcripts in Halifax and Oxford that we know of girls being trafficked here, and more recent reporting that we've all been able to do speaking to victims who've been taken to London as well. So it's just a matter of public record that London is part of that subset of group-based child sexual exploitation. It can't be denied.
I just wanted to clarify with the statements of the mayor that I was referring to. I wasn't actually referring to the interaction that he had with Assembly Member Hall. I was referring to after we'd all done our reporting, the mayor was confronted with this. I think it was like a PA interview where he said, we're not seeing what we saw in those northern towns. Why it was so significant was he didn't answer any of my questions. So this was the first time that a journalist was able to put it to him, and he responded by saying, we're not seeing what we saw, those terrible incidents in those northern towns. Then, when Mark Rowley sat here next to Sadiq Khan in front of all of you, he said, it's part of the picture. And that was a matter of, I think it was weeks between that. And there have repeatedly been these massive gaps. So, the mayor had said that there was no reports and no indication of grooming gangs in the capital. Simultaneously, the Met Police was going to the Home Office and giving them hundreds of cases that fell within that categorisation. So what happened? Did the mayor not know that the Met Police was doing it? Those type of things really need to be dug into, because What do they reveal about the way in which we've dealt with this issue and the way that our system, the way the Mayor and the Met speak to each other and what they say about this very important issue?
I mean, I guess any of us in any position can only really understand what we know about it and what people have told us. And I know from an example, a case who approached me, that it sounded like her case was very much along the Rotherham model. It was an East London borough, and the perpetrators were of Bangladeshi origin rather than Pakistani origin, but it seemed very similar to those kind of northern Milltown examples. And my worry is that if we talk in purely in generalities and just kind of assume that London is different, London is more broad, the spectrum is broader and more diverse than anywhere else in these examples, do we risk losing those examples, sort of falling through the cracks and kind of getting lost in the wider noise?
I don't think it's a case of them getting lost in the cracks. I think it's just about being honest about it. If the Commissioner is saying that is part of the picture, that is part of the picture. Presumably he has the best information. I think we just got to be honest about it. Yes, it's one component within the complexity of London, but we shouldn't get bogged down in that. And I think it's quite reductive when it just becomes, well, have we got the same thing as Rotherham and Rochdale? Yes, we do, but London's it's so much bigger and so much more diverse. Let's not just get bogged down in that. Let's just accept, yes, it's part of the picture, but it does not dominate.
If the Commissioner knows it, then the Mayor should know it too.
That's for him to answer, right?
On that point, I mean, it is, of course, part of the picture, where perhaps I might slightly disagree. I do think it requires a particular level of focus because we have seen decades of oversight and misunderstanding and failure to prosecute that form of criminality for a myriad of socio-political reasons and nervousness about it. That is a problem for child abuse in general. There are all sorts of barriers to confronting it. But I think there has been a particular institutional reluctance to deal with that form of criminality. When we've all spoken about sort of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, there was a subsection of that investigation called Organised Networks. It took 2 weeks. It looked at boarding schools. It looked at the Church of England. But it neglected to look at cases like Rotherham and Rochdale. And the lead counsel to the inquiry basically jettisoned it as an issue and they moved on. Now, do I think that attitude has been overcome in public institutions? Absolutely not. I do think it requires a particular degree of effort to understand that model of criminality. I can always feel an atmosphere of hesitation, reticence, and sort of a chilled atmosphere of concern whenever I talk about it, perhaps even in this room now, that there is a cultural, perhaps religious, though I don't think as much, or ethnic driver behind that form of offending that we just don't understand. There is so much evidence about it happening, and it has been ignored. London needs to get to grips with it as well, and I think it will require an additional level of focus because of the obfuscation and shying away from it that we've seen already from many public-facing institutions in London and around the country. People just do not want to talk about it. They don't want to ask the questions. Academics that you might be able to bring on this panel won't have those answers because it hasn't been studied. We now finally have a public inquiry into this issue, but it's taken decades to get there, and there's been a huge political battle about making sure it asks those questions. People have still fought to not ask those questions very publicly. So I do think, perhaps contrary to Zach and others, I do think it really does need a special level of focus, because if that can't be rooted out, then you'll fall at every hurdle.
Okay, thank you. What we mustn't lose sight of is that this has gone on for decades. Pointing fingers at anybody in particular isn't helpful. What we've got to do is to get everybody to accept that this is actually happening and try and find a way that we can stop it happening, or finding a way of dealing with this, because these poor children, I know you've spoken to many, I certainly have, and it is heartbreaking. And at some point, this has got to stop, and I would suggest sooner rather than later. I'm going to start off the questions. The next section is how offenders operate. you've answered some of this. Based on your research, how do grooming gangs in London operate in practice? So is there anything different? I know you've answered some of this, so you needn't repeat that. And how did the grooming gangs you reported on coordinate their activity? And you have actually mentioned how they all seem to, well, they don't all know each other, do they? One of the gangs I was dealing with, a multicultural gang, and to be fair, the girls weren't all white either. It was a multicultural thing altogether, and they were together, but they weren't together in that bond that we do see in some of the groups. So, do you see that as any difference in London? Because obviously we're concentrating on London. Do you see that there isn't that family ties as much in some of the groups? I know we do have the Rotherham type model here, but in the other groups, are they much looser in connection with each other?
I think what you need to understand about with these gangs is that the members of the group will often be groomed themselves to be a part of it. So there's one group that operated. I'm not going to say where it was, but how that worked, that was generational. So that went back. There was a particularly vile sex offender who was operating in the 1970s, the 1980s. In the 1980s, he then kind of had a protege who then kind of assumed like a kind of leadership position within that. And then as we went into the 2000s, there was another group of young men within that area. And why were they connected? Well, they were connected through elements of criminality. They could be socially connected. And so I think we've got to be careful about saying this is the model or this is the way that it works. There are definitely, you get patterns that you see repeated, but I think the most common pattern that you get is the method of abuse, of targeting these vulnerable young girls. And also just, it's like, these will be complicated networks that won't all follow the same pattern. And London is massive and complicated.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, London is, as Zach says, large and diverse, and the way that the gangs operate is diverse as well. There is obviously the targeting of vulnerable young people, predominantly in care, is a big part of it. As I think I mentioned earlier, hanging outside pupil referral units and places like that. And it is all sort of tied up, a lot of it as well, within the county lines model, where they are, young boys are targeted to sell drugs and for other criminal activity, and girls are targeted for sex. So I think there is no, as Zach said, there's no one distinct model that we see. We see lots of different ones across the city. And certainly in my research, it showed that.
Thank you. Nothing else to say. Thanks, Charlie. I'll move on now to Assembly Member Ahmed. We're leaving out question 10 because it's been answered.
Thank you, Chair. Rachel, you talked earlier when we were discussing the issue around county lines, and again I go back to what we as this committee, and I believe the Mayor has also been told by the police, that county lines is the exploitation of children. That is the big issue in London. That's something that's absolutely on record. That's what we've been consistently told. And you earlier talked, we had a bit of a conversation, didn't we, about county lines and how that's used. Can you tell us how clear the distinction is between child sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation?
I don't think it's clear at all. It's they are both massively interlinked. And county lines and that the way that county lines drug gangs exploit children in the city is a big issue, but it is not the only criminal exploitation of children. And when I was talking to some of the social workers and charity workers in London and some of the victims as well, they were often, they talked about how these drug gangs do draw children in with, gifts and, a model that we're all actually, I think, quite familiar with through various forms of media now. But the police have always focused on the sort of violent crime, the drug crime, and never the sexual exploitation that goes along with that. And that is something that a lot of the social workers and charity workers I spoke to say that, children and the victims, the young people, are more reluctant to talk about, particularly the boys that go through it. And therefore it is kind of ignored by police, but it's such a huge part of it. And I think Zach talked earlier about gift girls, how these young women are trafficked from the capital up to trap houses, places where these boys have been sent to sell drugs across the country as sort of essentially, gifts, or as stop these boys getting bored. And that is a model that also exists, and it is part of the sort of grooming gang culture in the city.
Zach. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, so I think what illustrates this best is that there's a youth worker that I've spoken to for many years, and what he said to me when I first asked him about this was, he said, kind of round about the 2013, 2014, Rochdale, Rotherham, the BBC drama came out, or there was this sense of it being in the national consciousness, child sexual exploitation. And he said that there was a lot of efforts. It was kind of the fashionable thing to do at the time. Then what happened was, as we got later in the decade, it started being exposed county lines and the drug gangs, and all of a sudden the focus that had been, and this is the way that he described the focus that had been, the energy to look at that child sexual abuse, it kind of morphed into child criminal exploitation, right? And as Rachel completely correctly says, it is just, you can't de-link those things. Like that so often, I mean, they do exist separate to one another, that you can say that, but it's the drugs, criminality, the people that are doing these type of crimes, they've got their fingers in a lot of pies, kind of thing. But what happened was the way in which we thought about it, it kind of, that, one thing superseded the other. And what we need to do is say that both of them are terrible and both of them are equally important.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank
Do you mind
you.
if I just quickly add to that?
Oh, sorry, Chuck.
Yeah, I think we can de-link them in some cases away from within these gangs, sort of facilitators and those who approach these gangs for the purposes of just sexual abuse, that those people aren't involved perhaps in wider criminality. There can be a de-linking between the two. And Seema, I think, obviously no longer here, but mentioned that as part of her investigation in terms of work that what she's uncovered in London. She was aware of some cases where men were not involved in the criminal exploitation of children, but were involved in just access purely to children for sexual ends. So the facilitators overlap in these appalling worlds, but a lot of those who just approach them and have that trust and access perhaps don't.
Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. This has been touched on lightly already, but perhaps we can just flesh it out a bit. It's to what extent are social media and online platforms being used as a method for child exploitation and abuse by grooming gangs, specifically in London?
I mean, I would say, that's the way that they do it. Mm-hmm. They don't have to. I mean, this is the terrifying thing about it, which is that a predator can reach into a vulnerable child's safe, a place that they are safe, and begin getting, essentially getting them to abuse themselves, exploiting them without even having to go, physically be there. And that's the terror, and it's exploding. If you speak to any of the experts in this field, they'll say because these predators now have such easy access to vulnerable children, more and more of them are doing it. So in terms of, it's difficult because also the other thing is that means that the gang doesn't even need to be based in London to start abusing the child. So yes, kind of absolutely, terrifyingly so, and almost like incomprehensible in terms of the scale at which we're talking.
Yeah, it's obviously massively exacerbated the issue because it means that even when a local authority realises a child is vulnerable and they may be in care and they move them away from the danger, or think they're moving them away from the danger, move them even out of London, it's still so easy for perpetrators to get hold of them, to find out where they are and to come and get them.
Yeah. I think it just reduces the barriers between perpetrators and victims. And I know I mentioned Snapchat before, I'll raise it again. I think it is a particularly useful tool for abusers because of how, and this is cases I've seen in London as well, and this is information shared with me from social workers, again, particularly in East London. I won't name specific boroughs, but where perpetrators have used their, what you'll all understand, I think, sort of snap stories, where they can share information publicly, which is then seen for a 24-hour period, about offering vapes to children. And, you know, previously, before the advent of that technology, Rachel's spoken about perpetrators hanging around pupil referral units, hang outside school gates. That was the modus operandi for these gangs across the country for decades, that it was dragging them away in public, as it were, into their own sort of nexus of control. They don't need to make that physical approach anymore. The child comes to them because of what they advertise publicly. And there are so many reasons why they might do that. We've touched on that already. But it's just an additional weapon. The actual exploitation itself hasn't really changed. Just the tools available have sort of sped up and improved the process for those perpetrators in many cases.
Thank you. There's a lot of talk at the moment regarding, access to online tools for children. Do you think that this aspect of the debate is being highlighted enough? Because obviously the usual talk is about kids accessing porn and all sorts of things on there. Do you think that this is widely known enough by the general public, and do you think it might shift the dial in the in people's views about whether there should be restrictions on children's access to online material or online platforms, I should say?
Absolutely is not enough a part of the debate. I mean, I think when Jess Phillips resigned, she was pointing out that she's been screaming from the rooftops from within the government. She was a safeguarding minister. She was screaming about this stuff that's happening, you know, and it wasn't having an impact. If she's not having an impact, I mean, what hope does anyone have?
Thank you.
Yeah, there's certainly. I mean, one of the cases I covered, a girl had taken explicit photos of herself as a young child, sent them to people. They'd been passed around, and the police had didn't really know how to deal with it because she'd taken those photos herself. She was young. So yeah, I mean, certainly it is something that it should be part of the debate.
Yeah, thank you. Charlie? No, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. One of the things that I particularly noticed, which is what I think of more as a grooming gang, is the number of survivors that I've spoken to that they've come to talk to me afterwards, years after it's happened, because they genuinely thought these people that groomed them were their boyfriends. And they are utterly convinced at the time. And it's only when they've matured, because obviously 13-year-old, 14-year-old, it's only sort of 10 years later, whatever, they suddenly realise exactly what was going on and, you know, and the terrible things then when they look back and they see how bad it is. Now, do you think the authorities recognise that particular aspect? Because I know it's only a small aspect of grooming gangs, but it's a real one, and it's one that's very difficult to deal with because those people aren't going to go looking for help because they think they've got a boyfriend. Does anybody recognise that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's particularly pernicious in those cases is how often, within the boyfriend model of exploitation, where there is often a central victim among a group of victims, that person that young girl or boy who believes that they're in a relationship with their abuser is often exploited further to facilitate wider offending. So I've used this term already, this sort of alpha victim term, that they are used to then recruit others because they have that tighter dark and brutal exploitative bond with the perpetrator or perpetrators. And because of that vulnerability, they give a whole range of further freedoms and opportunities to offenders. I know there is a greater understanding of that among police forces that have dealt with this extensively, particularly Greater Manchester Police and South Yorkshire Police, who, I think both forces now have dedicated ring-fenced CSE teams who are treated like major investigation teams, who understand the tactics that perpetrators use within the boyfriend model of exploitation. But I don't think it has widespread understanding. I think there are plenty of places, I think London included, where we sort of miss that understanding of how many of the victims will take so long to come forward, and sometimes never, of course, and as is completely understandable, because they've had that warped experience as a child into believing that they were loved, or that was good.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Have you had anything, Rachel?
Yeah, I think certainly some of the reports I covered, they did outline that the fact that police had not always recognised that model. If they had recognised it, they'd not treated it with the seriousness that it deserved. One of the problems that they had is often, particularly within some of these gangs, it is younger boys that are being used to talk to younger girls. So, the boy may be 18, 19 and the girl is sort of 15, 16. And that a lot of police officers just sort of thought that's not a problem. But actually, those young boys were being used to get these girls and then share them out among older men. So, I mean, it's still, in my experience, still a very prolific model because it is so effective.
Yeah, Zach.
Yeah, I think the thing that I come to, right, is why is it on the children to be coming forward?
Yeah, yes.
All of them will have had adults, people in their lives that can see that and see it's wrong. Shouldn't be on them to come forward. I think that it's missing. The opportunities are always there at the time, and I refuse to believe that there would be any situation where a child could hide that type of relationship through all the way through to the point that they just realise it years later. There has always been some failing by the adults that were around that child to do something about it.
Yeah, and the shocking thing is a couple of people in specifics were in care homes, and I think that's something we have got to be looking at, the evidence you're giving on care homes. And I said to one of them, well, how were you allowed out? And she said, well, we used to say we're going to see our boyfriends, and they knew. And they knew they came back in the middle of the night. And I said, when you think this can't be right. I said, well, didn't they say anything? Didn't they stop you? Didn't they try and talk to you about it? And they said, no, because we were with our boyfriends. And that's what they believed at the time. So one of the things that's definitely come out of this is I think we should be looking with regard to care homes. But there's so much we need to be looking at here.
But Susan, I think it's important to say, though, that it's like there will be people that might not have been able to protect the children. It's not always that they just accepted it. I think part of the problem is that a lot of these workers will probably be browbeaten by, like, oh my God, they raised the alarm to begin with and then nothing happened, or they went to their manager and they told them, and that's part of it. It's like these structural things that prevent people coming forward, or and that we should always say, so many fantastic people within that space too.
100%. And earlier you did bring up the fact that perhaps some of these care workers are frightened, and I think I've discussed it with you. I was phoned by one of these victims and said, do be very careful. The gang knows you're looking into this, and be careful for your safety. So, I assume people in care homes, and you alluded to it earlier, must also be very frightened for their safety, because these gangs are quite dangerous.
They're frightened of their safety, but also their professional future.
Yes, yes.
So many social workers in London I've spoken to about this, as I've mentioned previously, they have concerns about confidentiality limits on information they're allowed to share. Now, how have we got into a situation where a social worker believes that a child is pregnant because they've been raped multiple times by a gang, but can't share that information with the family because of confidentiality? Obviously, it's a very sensitive and tricky area, but perhaps while we're talking about the risks that social workers face, we also need to consider giving them more powers and freedoms to at least explore things. Because they have these multi-agency, multi-partnership meetings, they discuss serious cases they're working on. And all too often, from what I'm hearing, the decision is taken to not progress with disclosure or involving family members or others who might be able to support because there is concern about confidentiality. I think also there are some serious, and perhaps this is something that this committee might explore further, serious concerns in the NHS about them missing warning signs. No shortage of cases in London and I believe around the country as well of children presenting very clearly with signs of abuse. Perhaps we have just normalised and accepted that young teenagers will end up in healthcare due to sexual misadventure, for example. But actually, yeah, there are some clear signs that could be prosecuted further at that stage. That's a key evidence-gathering opportunity. And Baroness Casey mentioned that in her report last year. I'd like that to be chased up here, if you could, please.
Yes, OK, thank you very much. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. In terms of the actual abuse itself within London, where do you see that happening? Is that in private residences? Is that in hotels, business premises? Charlie, do you want to start?
Yeah, in terms of trafficking from out of London to London, cases that we've covered with good evidence, we're aware of abuse in private residences connected to a business, for example, and hotels.
And those are private residents, I suppose, that are different from family it would be perhaps, are you talking about a flat over a shop or something like that? Is that what you mean?
I can't be sure, but one of the case studies and experiences that has stunned me so often with these cases around the country is how often they are family homes and how often other members of the family of the perpetrator have so little power and opportunity and I suppose just power to speak up and to share their concerns, that they are witnesses to the abuse, but for a myriad of reasons allow it or don't go further in terms of raising concerns about it. I mean, Anne Cryer, the MP for Keighley, spoke about this in the late 90s, about issues she had and how she was a champion for so many Pakistani and Bangladeshi women in her constituency, I think about 27% and 4% respectively at that time. How often they were coming to her in private through the back door of her constituency office to share concerns. Now imagine that more widespread in terms of family members of perpetrators in these towns linked to London witnessing this but not being able to do so because of the limited power they have within the family structure. So private residences, yes, a lot of them isolated, used as basically as party houses, as they've been described in some towns, but also, perhaps most shockingly, family homes often used for the facilitation of this abuse, and businesses too, B&Bs, hotels.
Is it clear enough then for those people perhaps witnessing but fear for their protection of any route that they could get out to speak privately, confidentially about what they've seen? Is that something that needs to be looked at further? It's
a society-wide discussion that we need to have, absolutely, to give power to those women and those family members to come forward. And there have been some cases, there's one in Oldham, for example, where I know that sort of victim and family member of perpetrators have, in a sense, reconciled in later life. Where the child just says, I was a child when you were there and I know what happened to you. I'm so sorry and all the rest of it. And I was a witness, but I couldn't do anything. I feared for my life. And if you think about how insular some of these spaces are, how little power is afforded to members of those communities. Alexis Jay spoke about this in her Rotherham report, that a lot of the non-white Mirpuri victims of grooming gangs in Rotherham didn't speak out because it would damage their marriage prospects. That is how delicate and evil a situation we're discussing here. have nothing but, enormous sympathy and concern for those caught in that vortex of hell, which is what it really is, of being dragged in so many different situations. There is no doubt whatsoever that same dynamic occurs in London. We know about coercive and controlling behaviour. That's becoming more of a discussion in terms of crime and policing and social affairs, that people are more open to that as a discussion. And it will be an issue in these cases as well. And based on the evidence we've got in terms of girls who've been trafficked to London, there's good reason to believe that there'll be witnesses there of a similar circumstance to those case studies.
Rachel, Zach, did you want to add?
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add. I think, Charlie's covered it all there.
My point is, let's put some of these people behind bars. I mean, how is it, when you look at the number of convictions that they've got in Rochdale, where's the big grooming gang case that the Met have done? Obviously, Operation Granby, that seemed like it was going to be the Met's big one. This is the biggest, actually I would say, in a lot of regards, the best police force in the country. Why have we not had a single grooming gang that have been locked up? And listen, I guarantee you, when they do, the thing is, there are investigations that are ongoing that I know about, and what baffles me is why they are taking so long. The Met need a win here. Let's go out and do it. And I think when you're talking about people coming forward, we need to get people behind bars to begin with. Let's go after these groups. Make it a priority for the Met. When it was, we need to look at these cases for the Home Office. Can I get some extra officers? No, let's get some of them behind bars, because their activities have just been going on for decades and they've not had accountability. They think they're untouchable. We all need to remember that. That's what, has been said about one of the most vicious, or, allegedly vicious groups.
Yeah, in some of your work, Zach, you pulled out the incident in Redbridge in 2011, and that's where I grew up, and I knew it was happening there. And I didn't really realise, as a lot of the victims don't at the time, what it was, but it happened through shisha bars a lot of the time in Redbridge. Is that a premises as well that is still used, or because of the new smoke laws and a lot of it now being outside, has that changed?
Well, what I would say, one of the problems that we noticed that cropped up when there was some proactive action from councils to tackling this was that they would use kind of civil actions, or they would close. Essentially, if you find out, this address is linked to CSE, let's try and close that, or have a dispersal, or get some way to stop it without going after them criminally. Now, we know in London, what do? You just move it from one place to the other. And that we know that because councils came out and said, we closed X number of shisha bars that were linked to CSE. I don't think that went away. I think that just went to a different address.
Yeah, it sounds really boring, but it comes back to that licensing thing earlier, doesn't it?
I think, one of the cases I covered was a shisha bar in East London that was allegedly having sort of what were described in the report as child sex parties in it. And it was the council's licensing committee that closed it down, but there was never any sort of talk about what the police did. And clearly, they lost their licence, but then what? That it clearly just moved somewhere else. Those perpetrators didn't go anywhere.
I mean, the Met are amazing at solving murders, right? They do that amazingly. Let's use some expertise. Let's put some resources in to getting these done.
Yeah.
I wonder if something could be done in terms of working out to what extent the Met has engaged with the police forces, just as Zach and Rachel have said, to what extent the Met has engaged with police forces that have had such great success on this, including the National Crime Agency. What have they learnt from Greater Manchester Police and that dedicated major investigation team on CSE? Is there an embed or liaison officer situation? Is there an opportunity there? I'd love to know. They're not going to tell us. I'd love to know what they've done in terms of learning from GMP, because the Chief Constable there has basically turned it around entirely.
Well, we'll be asking them when we have the police force here, and I'm sure we'll want to know the answer. And this leads us perfectly into the last section, which is the Met's response to grooming gangs. So we're going to start with Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. What did your research find in terms of the Met's response to victim survivors and their stories?
Really, really bad. I mean, one of the key sources that we used were inspectorate reports, and they are damning. I think, look, some of the Met police officers that deal with these type of crimes are the most incredible officers and the most incredible people. But there's something that has gone wrong, that they've not been able to tackle this group-based issue. And I think, and I don't know, we really need to look at it, and whether it is something of what the sense of that it's not a problem here that's kind of filtered down to the officers, or what it really is. But yeah, it's not been good enough. And it's all the same things that you always hear about, which is the survivors being treated like they were responsible for it, not taken seriously. In some cases, it's like they come in and report this terrible abuse, and the suggestions from the officers come up with are just totally inadequate. So yeah, it's just not been good enough. Maybe that's a bit too much of a blunt and short answer.
Yeah, I agree with what Zach says. There is, it does appear not to be good enough. Often victims are criminalised themselves, or treated as criminals. Because in many cases they are sort of plied with drink and drugs. That is sort of a factor in seeing, with police perhaps seeing them not as proper victims, and they put themselves in those situations. And that was a theme among a lot of the reports and from the sort of case studies we spoke to as well. I think there has been some acknowledgement from the Commissioner that they've not acted perhaps in the best way previously, and there is more work going on with that. But there is such a distrust, I think, among a lot of victims of sexual assault and women about the Met for various high-profile cases, that I think it's quite a hard barrier to overcome. And even when cases have gone through and gone to court, in these sort of grooming cases have gone through, they've often collapsed or not come to any kind of conviction, and that doesn't help victims wanting to come forward if they're abused again, or whether they victims wanting to come forward in the first place. So there's a lot of work to be done around that, I think.
I just think you have to look at the track record in terms of prosecutions. Just a handful of men have been prosecuted for multi-offender CSE in London, and sort of the headline prosecution was 2013. There's 3 men who would traffic a girl to Ipswich, again pointing to the nationally linked and organised network analysis that we've been discussing today. We've heard from Sir Mark Rowley in the last year saying that the force is dealing with a steady flow of what he describes as multi-offender abuse cases. And then if you have a steady flow and no prosecutions, that's just a failure. On top of that, we know, of course, from their own announcements that they are reviewing 9,000 CSE cases, of which we don't know how many are within the grooming gang model. We don't know how many of those are group-based. At least I think we haven't had that clarification on how focused that investigation is. So I just think the track record answers the question quite straightforwardly, really, that the prosecutions are very low and the force admits that it's dealing with a lot of this problem. You can't get away from the fact that it's not being achieved. I am reassured by the fact that Operation Beacon Port has been launched, that Baroness Casey, one of her headline demands wasn't just this inquiry, but this national investigation, of which London will no doubt be a part of in terms of the policing operation. That's reviewing a lot of cold cases. Again, I have no doubt that London will be central to that, but flow, but we've not got any convictions. That really concerns me.
And what do you think the reasoning is behind that? Obviously, some of the other panellists said about people not being believed. Is that, you think, the primary driver? Is there another driver?
I don't know. I don't know what the method is for engaging with these sorts of cases. I know what Greater Manchester Police do, because they've told us all. I've got a pretty good understanding of the National Crime Agency model, because there have been so many trials that I've been to, and I've seen how they've worked it out, and I've spoken to lots of victims in those cases, and I've understood how they investigate those cases. And it's phenomenal. They've got a super high success rate in terms of achieving prosecutions, even for crimes that happened 30 years ago. And that is difficult to achieve. That is tier 1 policing. What is the Met doing? I don't really know. What have they learnt from those forces? I don't know at all about that. Are they treating it as Jim Gamble, the former head of CEOP, said? Are they treating CSE like organised criminality? Are they treating it with that level of seriousness? I don't know. So it's hard to answer.
Zach, sorry, did you want to come in?
Yeah, what I think that we really need to understand is that you have to prove it to survivors. And the way that you prove it is by putting people behind bars. A lot of the times it's by you put their perpetrator behind bars and they feel empowered to come forward. But one of the big issues that you have, which is this, and you see this repeated in cases where, you know, the survivor has not been taken seriously, where they will have disclosed it, they may have made a police report, it wasn't dealt with properly. And then if we do get the situation where the Met are going, oh, okay, yeah, we are going to take it, they will turn up on that same survivor's door and say, can you help us out with this? Well, the trust is just not there. And perhaps there needs to be some way in which it's more about, and we always talk about the money that's spent on these things, and so often with the money that's spent, we don't think about the well-being of the survivors. And actually, if you improve the well-being of the survivors, then you're more likely to get prosecutions if you support them better, because sadly still it will then rest on them and the evidence that they give in court.
Thank you very much.
Just one more. I know that this is going back some time now, but in the mid-2000s, social workers in Rotherham actually did look at the Met, and this is not well known at all, did actually look at the Met as having some strategies and tactics for dealing with CSE that they wanted to repeat, particularly in terms of using proceeds of crime orders. So if they couldn't get the evidence required to prosecute gangs in London for child abuse, they would often go at them for wider criminality. And again, this has been speaking about the trends we've noticed more broadly. Now, other forces have picked that up since. But I do know that the Met was considered as having a bit of a gold standard there 20 years ago. So there has been some sort of ingenuity, I suppose, in sort of working around the limits they've had to endure with evidence that was going back some time now. But again, we don't know what they're doing now. And I think, as Zach was saying, to get the trust of survivors to come forward, you do need those early prosecutions to achieve them. In Rotherham, for example, again, to go back to that town, a lot of the victims have come forward after they've seen 30, 40, 50 prosecutions from the National Crime Agency and said, they will believe me. You know, Alexis J found 1,400 victims in Rotherham in 2014. The NCA found over 1,500. They were able to revise that up because they acquired trust, and they acquired trust through successful prosecutions. You can see why people perhaps don't want to come forward, and they've spoken to us, they've spoken to some assembly members, because the headline conviction in this is from 2013.
Yeah, thank you very much, all of you, for those contributions. In terms of providing support to survivors, it's coming through pretty clearly that the best support would be prosecutions. But the Mayor has invested in support services, I think £6.5 million into the violence and exploitation support services, and a £2.4 million package to expand services for victims and survivors. Are you finding that that's making a difference? Are people aware of that? And how do you think those services could best be delivered to support survivors and victims?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need victim services if you don't have victims. So I I think some of the people that I spoke to have certainly used those services. I think the Lighthouse project and projects like that. And obviously, they are very much needed and very useful. There are not enough of them in London, is what I've heard, and also they are not well equipped enough to deal with the sort of scale of what is going on. And I would say that some people have also said that they don't want to necessarily, they have to seek them out essentially, and it can be quite difficult for them to do that, and they don't necessarily trust those sort of services. A lot of the victims are from, as we've heard, very vulnerable backgrounds, and they just, they spent their entire life being passed from care workers and social workers and all these people, and they just don't have the, capacity or want to go and seek someone else out and sit down with them. But no, they are certainly the investment that has gone in so far, although it perhaps is not quite enough, is certainly very much needed. And I have spoken to people who have used it and have found it helpful.
I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. One of the complicated things with these cases is that it will just bleed into all sorts of other council services. If you've been abused in this way, the likelihood of you becoming a drug user is incredibly high. And I'm sure that all of us would have had experiences with survivors who have become addicted to substances as a way of dealing with that. But that makes it can be a chaotic and difficult situation, certainly quite challenging then to present yourself to a service in a particular way. I mean, there might be a way to other ones, but there's huge amounts of overlap, and anything where it can be integrated, because I'm sure that if we were able to provide better services for drug users, you would find that then, lots of them are survivors, and, it kind of like interlinks to each other. I know it's not an easy thing to tackle.
I think if there's one thing that I've learnt more than anything from working on these sorts of stories for so long and working with these survivors, it's taught me just the remarkable sense of human endurance and resilience that they have, and that they can be sort of denigrated to their whole lives but still overcome that to an degree and have, even in lacking hope that they'll get justice, they still work towards it because it's the direction they have to take, they feel they have to take. Support services are always going to be welcome to help them along that journey, but I just go back to the point, I do think what they want more than anything is justice, and the best way to achieve that is effective policing. And a lot of them are ready. They're ready to be heard, right? A lot of them want to be engaged with. It's just they need to see evidence that it's going to work when they do so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I've got 3 people that want to come in under this. We are running out of time, and one of our Assembly members hasn't spoke yet. So first of all, Assembly Member Wilson.
I'll keep
Briefly,
it very quick question.
And if you could have brief answers, because I will stop at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, it's to you, Charlie. In your Mail article, the quote where you talk about a combination of naivety and inaction on the part of the Metropolitan Police and local politicians. Just wondering if you might be able to expand slightly on that, what you mean by that.
Naivety, I think, goes into the reticence to accept that this is a problem or how widespread it is, some of which we've discussed already. The inaction, again, we've already discussed it, I think, at some length, in terms of the failure to treat it as something that requires specific and distinct processes, and the various subsets of these organised networks that require a level of understanding that I think people are ignorant of a lot of the time. And I think a lot of naivety and inaction revolves around failing to get a grip of the various factors that contribute to victims falling into these horrible situations where they're dragged into these networks of exploitation. I refer back to the limits that social workers had in terms of being able to progress with cases due to confidentiality concerns and also limits in terms of fearing honour-based violence. I haven't seen enough of an appeal or a progress made about that publicly. The Met, obviously, Zach has mentioned it previously, they do have exceptional officers working on these cases, as many police forces do. But I think people would be more reassured and have a greater sense of what they might achieve if they go to the Met if there was that language of seriousness, rather than we're dealing with a steady flow and we're reviewing lots of cases but no information on where that's going to go, and the headline being 2013 in terms of a prosecution.
Okay, thank you. Very briefly, Assemblymember Ahmed.
Thank you. Charlie, very popular this morning, so questions to you, and it's very specifically about the issue of prosecution. So quite rightly, you've said there aren't enough prosecutions, but as you know, prosecution isn't just about the investigation. There are certain loops that it has to go through. So, for example, I'd suggest that maybe a lot of the cases that are investigated, they fall short of the evidential sufficiency test when they get to the CPS, for good reason. I mean, Zach quite rightly has talked about the support being offered to victim survivors. You know, my colleague, Assemblymember Small Edwards, has talked about what the Mayor's doing in terms of trying to support victims. But do you think there is a wider issue in terms of the legal framework that needs to be looked at for prosecutions to succeed?
Yes, absolutely. But also at the same time, the disparity between successful prosecutions in London versus in Greater Manchester and in South Yorkshire, I do think that reveals some potential major lessons for the Met to build on. There's no doubt, of course, that there are evidential concerns. But what are those forces doing to overcome those hurdles that hasn't been achieved in London? It'd be really interesting to know, what have they or have they not learnt from those forces? Why does the National Crime Agency achieve so much success in South Yorkshire that force locally did not for so long? They were dealing with the same evidence. Often the NCA were dealing with it 15 years after South Yorkshire Police. How were they able to get the evidential threshold? So I think it's just, I fear it might be a lack of will. I fear it might be a lack of strategy that they have failed to acquire from other forces. Again, I reaffirm that I do think there are some exceptional officers working on this, but I just worry, why is it the case that those forces have achieved so much, often in retrospect, and we've not had the same success here, particularly when we've had cases like in Oxford, where we know that one of the victims there was trafficked to London Paddington 6 times and taken onwards for abuse. So I've not heard anything from the Met, but that very public case saying this is what we did to chase up on that information. That's their responsibility.
Sorry, Zach, just wanted to come in very quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, I think volume is also an issue here, which is the amount of cases that an officer in the Met might have to deal with. Also, who interacts with the survivor at that first point. And I think, a lot of the worst failings that we found was because, perhaps a junior officer has walked in, thought, oh my God, this is a difficult one to deal with, and then not directed up the chain. I think what I would say to Charlie's point, why did the NCA? Because they're able to just have that laser focus on it and really go after it. And that's what we need here, I think, to get results.
I'll just add as well. There is, I think, part of it as well is the Met Police has a focus on, when it comes to child criminal exploitation, on grooming gangs. It's on county lines gangs. So they do prosecute a lot of county lines gangs. You get, press releases every month from the Met about another county lines gang prosecuted, and that is where those resources and that is where those officers are focused.
Okay. Thank you. If you could be as quick as possible. Apologies, Assemblymember Hamdash.
Just a very quick comment about the survivors groups. I think that was really helpful, but I'm really conscious that there's a number of borough-based charities who were set up to support care home abuse victims from the 70s, and those charities are facing a really hostile space. I know in Islington, in my borough, the Islington Survivors Network has had a cut of 30%. I know the Lambeth Survivors Network has also had a very hostile relationship with the council. I do wonder whether these groups that have a lot of expertise in the failings of the care homes and abuse should be getting more support and more voices to help survivors from today. So, just separately on the question, so the Independent Inquiry into Child Sex Abuse in England and Wales published a report on child sexual exploitation by organised networks, which highlighted cases of victim blaming and the treatment of sexually exploited children as criminals. Did you find examples of this in your work?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and also, the Met's inspectorate reports. You see that. Look, I know that there has been efforts from the mayor to tackle this victim blaming approach. This language. It's so endemic. It's so baked in to our society and the way that we think about these things, and these prejudices that we think we're challenging are still there, especially when it comes to a survivor that is from a challenging background and that is in a care home. So absolutely, yes, that is riddled throughout. I think, it's interesting with that Redbridge case, the one that was there, if you look at the charge sheet at the beginning and then you look at the prosecutions, there's a massive drop-off. And I think that tells a lot of the story, and in terms of also, what we're picking up on why aren't there more prosecutions?
Yeah, reiterate everything Zach said. Absolutely.
I have a lot of concerns about charities who work in this space. I think, unfortunately, and this is in no reference to the organisations you've just mentioned, but nationally, all too often, children's charities have been part of the culture of silence when it comes to grooming gangs. They have not wanted to, quote unquote, rock the boat. Martin Neri, who ran the children's charity Bernardo's, very serious senior role in a major national charity, he spoke about how he was pressured into not talking about grooming gangs after he left the charity. When he raised concerns about it on national radio, he was dragged through sort of slander for many months after that because he took that bold action. It was part of what Andrew Norfolk described as the conspiracy of silence that he was up against when he was talking about Rotherham 15 years ago, that charities just didn't want to engage with him on it. And I think that they follow the example of the state of law, of justice, and of people like you guys in the room, of politicians as well. If adequate focus is given in those directions, and I think charities will follow. But if the standard is set that this is too difficult to talk about, or that elements of it are squeamish and shouldn't be engaged with, charities will often do the easy thing. They're often led by people who don't want to cause controversy and therefore shy away from difficult issues. They will then chin it off, to be frank. That is a major concern I have about charities nationally. Many of them have signed letters raising concerns when politicians have spoken about these specific issues. That has to change. I think, thankfully, it's changing because of what Baroness Casey did last year. Yeah. There is now more of a culture of openness and rightly engaging with it. Think about the British Pakistani woman Kishwa Faulkner, who shifted a lot of conversation on this, well, coming out and saying we have a problem, we need to engage. I think London is suffering from that latent response to those concerns as well. It's by no means unique, but it's still a problem that this capital has too.
Thank you. Assembly Member Desai, much of your question has been asked. Can you ask something nice and quick?
Yeah, I think my question, to some extent,
yes,
to some extent it has already been answered, but I'll still put it to you. What is your experience working with and liaising with the Met as part of your investigations, and how did this compare with other experiences you had across the country?
Now, if I could just, I know some of you have already answered this, so if you could keep it as short as you can.
I mean, I think that let's look forward, let's do better. I think it's been found lacking in areas, but we can improve it, we can do it. Let's give the Met the boost to go out and get a load of these grooming gangs and really do a good job.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard a lot from the Commissioner about how there is improvements going on in this area, and I hope that they do come to fruition.
I've heard both of those responses. I think the Met has demonstrated a greater interest in dealing with this. They've demonstrated a greater sense of concern. I think what needs to happen now, obviously, to gain the trust of the victims and survivors who are speaking to us, is to see that interest turned into sufficient action.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's now just before 1 o'clock, and I do assure all of you the London Assembly will be giving this our focus. I'd like to really thank you all, and of course Seema, for attending today's meeting and for your honest and open answers to our questions. It is absolutely essential that this is taken forward, not only for the victims that we have at the moment, but for future victims. And we must deal with the culture of silence, because I do believe that that is what is causing this to have gone on for so long. So can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 17th of June 2026 at 10 a.m. in the Chambers City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.